Hello there and welcome to Simply About Earth, where curiosity finds its cozy corner and science takes the winding path toward wonder. Tonight, we're settling into a question that has quietly followed human imagination for generations, though it doesn't always make the headlines or fill the textbooks. What if the very first civilization on Earth wasn't here when we arrived? What if they had already gathered their belongings, turned their eyes and engines toward the stars, and slipped away before history even began? Before we embark on this gentle exploration together, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Drop a comment below and tell us not just the place, but the moment. Is it late evening where you are, and you're winding down after a long day? Is it early morning with light just beginning to climb the walls? Maybe you're somewhere in between, resting, waiting, letting time pass. Wherever you are, whatever the hour, that's where we'll begin from. A small corner of Earth connected to countless others, sharing this strange possibility that we might not be the first. It's a thought that sounds like it belongs in a dusty science fiction paperback, or maybe whispered between stargazers on a long night. But the more you sit with it, the more intriguing it becomes. Imagine for a moment that humanity isn't the first to call this planet home. We're used to thinking of ourselves as the pioneers, the explorers, the experimenters who push out into the unknown. But what if we're actually inheritors? What if there was once a civilization before us, one that gazed at the same moon, felt the same winds, drank from the same rivers, and yet chose a path we haven't fully dared to follow? They left Earth behind. It's a question that doesn't demand proof to be worth pondering. It's one of those rare ideas that opens a door in the mind, and you don't need evidence to walk through it. You only need the willingness to wonder. If you find this journey soothing, thought-provoking, or even just a gentle background as you let the day melt away, it would mean the world if you gave this little corner of calm a like, or maybe subscribed so that others who need a quiet space for curiosity might find it too. But no rush, no pressure. We're not here to count minutes or chase after numbers. We're here to simply lean into the question together. Now that we've set our pace, let's take the first step. The idea of another civilization leaving Earth isn't as far-fetched as it might sound. After all, we ourselves talk constantly about the possibility of leaving. Space agencies plan for Mars missions, scientists imagine colonies under domes on icy moons, and entire industries speculate about mining asteroids for resources. We frame it as something in the far future, something for grandchildren or great-grandchildren to attempt. But what if that story has already played out once before? What if another species, or even an earlier version of us, had looked at the same sky and decided not to wait? The first thing that strikes most people when this idea is raised is, where would they go? The universe, after all, is vast and hostile. Planets are rare, stars are scattered, distances stretch beyond comfort. But maybe those aren't the right questions to start with. Maybe the first question is simply, why leave at all? Why turn away from oceans, forests, and fertile fields? Why trade the comfort of rivers and rains for the cold silence of space? And yet, if we listen closely to ourselves, don't we already know the answer? Curiosity, survival, ambition, all the same drives that tug at us today might have tugged at them long ago. Somewhere in the silence of deep time, it's not impossible to imagine a people who mastered their world and looked up, realizing mastery wasn't enough. Maybe they saw signs of disaster, changes in climate, shifts in resources, or cycles of extinction that we now dig up as fossils. Maybe they felt the same fragility we sometimes sense when we hear about asteroid impacts or supervolcanoes, or the distant hum of a star eventually burning out. Maybe they simply grew restless, the way humans do when a horizon becomes too familiar for too long. The reasons could be many, but the impulse is familiar, and so we begin to picture them. Not in detail, because we can't know their faces or their languages or their tools, but in outline. A civilization that built, dreamed, experimented, and finally reached a threshold we have not yet crossed. The threshold of leaving Earth, not for a quick orbit or a brief landing, but for good. To them, it might have been a necessity. To us, it looks like an unimaginable feat. But then again, think about how much of what we consider normal today would have looked unimaginable to our own ancestors a few hundred years ago. Talking across continents instantly, flying through the skies faster than birds, carrying entire libraries in a small device in your pocket. If technology can leap forward so quickly in the span of centuries, what might it have done over tens of thousands of years, or even longer? There's another thought to hold gently in the back of the mind. If such a civilization did exist and did leave, what remains of them here? Perhaps nothing, perhaps only the faintest traces, buried so deep in the earth or in myth that we can't see them clearly. But sometimes people wonder about the oldest stories humans tell, the ones that describe gods descending from the sky, teachers who came from above, or ancestors who returned to the stars. We usually read those tales as symbolic, poetic, or imaginative. But once in a while, when we're already thinking about lost civilizations, the possibility slips in. What if those stories weren't only stories? What if they were the faintest memory of a departure, witnessed but not fully understood? Of course, most scientists would raise an eyebrow at the idea. There is no evidence, no fossils of starships, no bones that belong to strangers. Archaeology, geology, paleontology, all of these tell a story of Earth that we piece together slowly, patiently. And yet, those same sciences remind us that Earth is very good at erasing. Entire mountain ranges rise and fall, continents drift, oceans open and close. If a civilization had existed millions of years ago, how much of it would survive for us to find? Perhaps only fragments, perhaps only silence. And silence is exactly what we have, which makes the wondering all the more tempting. And so, as we sit here together letting the edges of the day soften, it's worth asking ourselves not whether the story is true, but whether it's worth considering. Because in thinking about it, we also think about ourselves. What would drive us to leave? What would we take? What would we hope to find? If another people already answered those questions long ago, then maybe we're not as unique as we think. And if not, if we are the first, then maybe we're standing on the edge of a path they never took. Either way, the wondering itself connects us to something larger than daily routines or ticking clocks. You don't need to decide right now what you believe. The beauty of questions like this is that they don't insist. They just linger softly, waiting for us to pick them up when we're ready. Like an old book on a shelf, or a star on the edge of vision. You can let the idea sit quietly in the back of your mind. Maybe it will drift into your dreams tonight, reshaping the way the stars look when you next see them. And that's how we'll begin, with a quiet greeting, a shared curiosity, and an open space to explore what it might mean if the first to walk this earth were also the first to leave it. If you close your eyes and picture the earth not as we know it today, but as it might have been tens of thousands or even millions of years ago, you might find it difficult to imagine cities or machines hidden in that deep past. We're taught that humans have only been building societies for a short stretch of time, that before us there were scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, and before them, creatures who shared only fragments of our shape. The story we carry in school books begins not too long ago, with fire, farming, and villages that slowly grew into towns. And yet, when we step back and look at the scale of the planet, the age of the rocks and the length of time life has existed here, the human story feels small, a tiny flicker in an enormous night. Somewhere inside that long darkness, it isn't so hard to imagine another flame once burned, briefly or brightly, and then went out, or went elsewhere. The idea of a lost civilization is usually dressed in myths and conspiracies when we first encounter it. People talk about Atlantis, about Lemuria, about golden ages that sank beneath the seas or vanished into deserts. These stories mix history with imagination, archaeology with wishful thinking. Most of the time they don't hold up to scrutiny, but they persist because they speak to a deeper possibility that we are not the first to wonder. not the first to build, not the first to reach. What if one of those old stories wasn't entirely wrong? What if instead of sinking into the ocean or crumbling into dust, the people of an earlier age chose another ending? They looked upward instead of downward, outward instead of inward, and quietly slipped away, leaving us only the faintest echoes. Of course, this isn't the usual way we frame history. Archaeologists dig, geologists drill, paleontologists brush soil from bones, and the evidence builds into a picture of continuity. But continuity isn't certainty. Earth is restless. It recycles itself. What was once a mountain is ground into sand. What was once a forest is buried into coal. What was once a seabed rises into peaks. Over millions of years, the surface of the planet wipes itself clean, more effectively than any hand with a cloth. If there were structures older than our known civilizations, what would remain? Perhaps only whispers in myths, fragments of anomalies, or curious alignments of stone. To us they might look like natural formations, geological quirks or coincidences, and maybe that's all they are. But in a question like this, we allow ourselves to lean a little into the possibility that not everything is as straightforward as it appears. Think about the times we've misread our own history. For centuries, people thought Troy was nothing more than a legend, a story told in epic poetry. Then ruins were found that matched descriptions, and suddenly myth became archaeology. For years, Viking voyages to North America were dismissed as exaggerations, until a settlement was discovered in Newfoundland. Our certainty about the past often bends when new evidence appears. So when we speak of a lost civilization that might have left Earth, we're not claiming proof. We're simply holding open the space for possibility, acknowledging that the past is vast and our knowledge of it is still young. If such a civilization existed, it would not have needed to look like us. It may not have been human at all, or if it was, it may have been a branch of humanity that took a different path, one erased from the fossil record by chance or by the deep patience of erosion and tectonics. Some scientists have even entertained thought experiments known as the Silurian hypothesis, asking whether we could detect signs of an industrial civilization if one had existed millions of years before us. The conclusion was humbling. Not much would survive. Plastics degrade, metals corrode, cities crumble, satellites fall, and in a few million years, even the scars of industry could be swallowed by the earth. Perhaps only subtle chemical traces in the soil or atmosphere would remain, faint hints that something unusual had once stirred here. But departure adds another layer. If they left, they might have taken much with them: knowledge, tools, culture, memory, all of it carried away like luggage on a voyage. The earth we walk today could be, in a sense, their abandoned house, tidied up by nature and repopulated by new tenants who never met the landlords. We could be living in a second-hand home, unaware that someone else once walked these halls and chose to move on. The absence of evidence in that case is not only unsurprising but inevitable. The question then becomes, what would drive a civilization to leave, and how would they manage it? These aren't idle details. They shape whether the idea is remotely plausible. In our own world, the idea of leaving Earth permanently still feels impossibly far. The technology to carry whole populations into space is beyond us, at least for now. But consider the long sweep of time. 1,000,000 years ago, early humans were barely beginning to shape stone tools. 1,000,000 years from now, if we survive, we might shape galaxies. The scale of technological change is not linear, but exponential. If a civilization began even a few million years before us, they could have had time to master techniques we can't yet dream of. The departure might not have been sudden or dramatic. It could have unfolded slowly, like migration. A few explorers leaving first, then more following, until only scattered remnants remained. Over generations, the bulk of their people may have lived off-world, leaving Earth gradually, until one day, perhaps without even noticing the exact moment, the balance tipped, and Earth was no longer their home. To us, it looks like absence. but to them it might have been continuity. The same way our ancestors once left Africa and spread across the globe, to leave Earth would have been the same, just on a larger scale. And so we return to the whisper of departure. It's not a thunderous event, not a grand spectacle, but a quiet possibility. They didn't vanish in a single night. They didn't leave ruins lit by fire. They simply faded outward, like a tide receding, leaving the shore bare and silent behind them. The evidence of their going would be the very emptiness we now find, the absence of anomalies, the lack of proof. Silence itself becomes the testimony. This silence, though, is not empty. It invites us to listen closer. It makes us lean forward, asking what if. And in that act of listening, we begin to notice how many stories in our culture already circle around this idea. The myths of sky beings, the legends of those who return to the stars, the patterns in folklore that echo across continents. They may be coincidence, they may be invention, or they may be fragments, distorted memories of encounters with those who had already begun their journey away. Human memory is not reliable, but it is persistent. Stories stretch across thousands of years. Perhaps they are stretched across longer still. Even the sciences sometimes echo the possibility in quieter tones. Astrobiologists ask where life might arise, and why we haven't seen evidence of it yet. The Fermi paradox points to the silence of the skies, the absence of signals. We wonder why, if civilizations are possible, we don't hear from them. But perhaps one answer is that they've already moved beyond the need to communicate, or that they've chosen silence deliberately, or that their frequencies and methods lie outside our narrow band of detection. If the first civilization left Earth, it might explain not only our own mysteries but also the greater cosmic silence. They didn't disappear, they simply moved out of range. And so, as the thought lingers, we find ourselves in a curious place. The idea of a lost civilization that left Earth doesn't demand belief. It only offers perspective. It reminds us that what we consider unique may not be. It humbles us, softens us, makes us consider that our story may be one chapter in a longer book, a book whose earlier pages are missing or perhaps hidden. It doesn't tell us whether to expect their return or whether to fear their absence. It simply invites us to remember that history is longer than we imagine, that time is deeper than we measure, and that the quiet spaces in the record may hold more than we think. And we carry on gently, wondering not just about whether they left, but about what that leaving would mean for us, for our understanding of who we are, and for our future when we too may face the same choice they once did. When you think about leaving home, really leaving it, not just for a holiday or a move to another town, but for good, the first question that comes up is why? Why would anyone turn their back on the familiar and step into the unknown? For us, it might be easier to imagine leaving a house, a city, even a continent. But leaving an entire planet is a scale of departure that feels almost impossible. And yet, when we look at ourselves today, we can already see the first seeds of that idea sprouting. We talk about Mars colonies, about building habitats on the moon, about starships that one day could carry us far beyond the sun. If those thoughts exist in us now, why shouldn't they have existed in another civilization before us? Curiosity has always been one of humanity's most restless companions. It doesn't sit still. From the first steps out of Africa to the voyages across oceans, people have always looked at horizons not as barriers, but as invitations. Every new frontier seemed impossible until it wasn't. Mountains were climbed, seas were crossed, skies were flown. The same pattern repeats again and again. The unknown calls, and eventually someone answers. Maybe the first civilization on Earth, whoever they were, felt that call not just across a river or a desert, but across the sky. The stars would have whispered to them the same way they whisper to us, pulling at the edges of imagination, asking what lies beyond. Of course, curiosity alone isn't always enough to drive such a monumental decision. There's also survival. Earth is generous but unpredictable. It gives us food, water, shelter, warmth, but it also brings earthquakes, floods, droughts, ice ages, and extinctions. We often think of our modern world as fragile, but the truth is that life on Earth has always walked a tightrope. Species rise and fall, entire ecosystems vanish. In the long story of life, extinction is far more common than survival. A civilization wise enough to see patterns in nature might have realized this. They might have understood that if they wanted to endure, they could not tie their fate to a single planet, no matter how beautiful it was. To stay meant to risk eventual disappearance. To leave meant a chance at continuity. It's the same reasoning we use today when we talk about becoming a multi-planet species. Asteroid impacts, solar flares, supervolcanoes, climate shifts. These are not just abstract dangers. They've happened before. The Earth's history is punctuated with sudden catastrophic events. Dinosaurs ruled for millions of years until an asteroid changed everything. Entire forests turned to coal. Seas dried. Glaciers advanced and retreated. If you're a species that can see far enough back into history, you begin to recognize the warning signs. Maybe the first civilization read those signs and understood them in ways we can barely imagine. Maybe they didn't want to wait for the next catastrophe. Maybe they saw leaving not as an adventure, but as insurance. It could also have been necessity born from their own actions. Civilizations often alter their environments. We cut down forests, burn fuels, reshape landscapes, and sometimes strain the very systems that sustain us. Perhaps they did the same, but on a scale that forced a choice. If they advanced far earlier than we did, they may have faced environmental challenges not unlike ours: pollution, resource depletion, imbalance. We know how quickly human industry has transformed the Earth in just a few centuries. Imagine a civilization with thousands or even millions of years to do the same. The weight of their own success might have pushed them outward, searching for relief among the stars. And yet, not all motivations need to be so dire. Sometimes leaving isn't about fear or necessity, but about hope, the dream of something greater, of spreading into new worlds, of building beyond the limits of one cradle. The first civilization might have looked up and seen not a dangerous sky, but an open field. Planets like fertile soil waiting for seeds, stars like distant neighbors waiting to be met. They may have felt that to remain was to stagnate, to shrink. To grow, they had to step beyond the familiar. When we imagine their decision, we can't help but compare it to our own. We send probes to Mars, we peer into the Kuiper Belt, we design telescopes to search for exoplanets. Even in our infancy as a spacefaring species, we already carry the same impulses. We talk about building outposts, sending settlers, mining asteroids. To us, it still sounds like science fiction. But for them, if they had time and ingenuity on their side, it could have been the next logical step. The same way our ancestors left their valleys to find new lands, they may have left their world to find new homes. There's also something about the human, or perhaps universal, resistance to limits. Every time we think we've reached the edge, we push beyond it. No mountain is unclimbed forever. No ocean uncrossed forever. No planet untouched forever. If a civilization had already mastered the Earth, its lands, its seas, its skies, what frontier would remain except the one overhead? At some point, the only way forward is upward. And maybe leaving Earth wasn't about abandoning it at all. Maybe it was expansion, not departure. They could have left colonies here, populations that dwindled or blended into what became us, while the majority carried on elsewhere. In that case, we wouldn't just be the successors of Earth. We might be distant cousins to travelers who long ago set sail among the stars. That thought reshapes loneliness into something else. A quiet connection stretched across light years, a kinship with unseen wanderers. The question of why to leave Earth is the same question we ask ourselves today when we debate space exploration. Some argue it's too expensive, too risky, unnecessary when there are problems to solve here. Others argue it's essential, the only way to ensure long-term survival. The truth is probably both. We need to care for the Earth we have, but also look outward. If we can see that, then surely they could have too. The reasons would have been similar: curiosity, survival, hope, ambition. Motivations don't change as much as we think. They're as old as life itself. It's worth remembering that leaving doesn't mean rejecting. If they loved Earth as much as we do, perhaps leaving was bittersweet. Perhaps they carried reminders of it with them. Plants, animals, stories, memories, the way settlers once carried seeds to new continents. They might have carried fragments of Earth to seed elsewhere. Every step away may have been filled with longing, with the ache of distance, but also with the thrill of possibility. That tension is part of what makes the idea feel real. To leave Earth would not be easy. It would be an act filled with both sorrow and joy, both necessity and choice. When you put all of this together, the picture becomes less outlandish. A civilization that saw danger in staying, opportunity in leaving, and curiosity in every horizon might well choose to step into the stars. The decision, in the end, is not so foreign to us. It's the same decision we face in our own future. When we talk about Mars, when we imagine starships, when we dream of exploring beyond the solar system, we're asking the same question they may have already answered. Why leave home? And the answer, as always, is because sometimes leaving is the only way to truly continue. And so the idea of their departure becomes less like a fantasy and more like a mirror. In wondering why they left, we begin to understand why we might one day do the same. Curiosity pushes, survival demands, hope invites, and somewhere in that mixture lies the quiet courage to step away from everything familiar, to trust that what lies beyond is worth the risk. When people first began to look upward, long before telescopes, satellites, or star charts, the sky was not just decoration, it was information. The patterns of stars, the slow drift of constellations, the phases of the moon, and the steady cycle of the sun were more than pretty lights. They were guides, signals, clocks, calendars, stories, and warnings. For thousands of years, human beings have used the heavens as a kind of map, marking seasons, predicting floods, guiding travelers across deserts and oceans. If even we, a young civilization still rooted mostly to one planet, can do this, imagine what the first civilization might have seen when they looked upward with sharper eyes, perhaps with minds more advanced or tools more refined. The stars don't just sparkle, they move in patterns you can measure. The Earth's tilt creates seasons. The moon pulls tides with its phases. The Milky Way arches across the night as a shimmering river. For our ancestors, the sky was a living system, a moving framework that explained not only where they were but when they were. And if you notice carefully enough, the sky reveals more than just local rhythms. It hints at the larger structure of the universe, at other worlds circling other suns. For a civilization driven by curiosity or survival, the sky would not just be a mystery, it would be a roadmap. Consider how early human cultures used the stars. Polynesian navigators read the positions of constellations to travel across thousands of kilometers of open ocean without compasses. Egyptians aligned pyramids to Orion's belt and tracked the rising of Sirius to predict the flooding of the Nile. Ancient Chinese astronomers kept meticulous records of eclipses, comets, and novae, noting each change in the sky as though it were an entry in a cosmic diary. In Mesoamerica, Maya scholars constructed calendars of staggering precision, predicting planetary cycles with a mathematical accuracy that rivals modern calculations. These are all fragments of what humans have done in just the last few thousand years. A first civilization with hundreds of thousands or even millions of years to study the heavens could have built maps far beyond anything we know. It's possible they looked at the stars and did not see distant, unreachable lights, but potential destinations. When you live long enough under the night sky, you notice more than patterns. You begin to suspect other places, planets drifting like wanderers around their stars, moons circling like companions, comets sweeping like messengers. If their minds were tuned to exploration, Each point of light might have been a marker not just in myth, but in a real itinerary, a set of future journeys waiting to be made. The sky also offers another kind of information, the passage of time across vast scales. Stars shift their positions over millennia due to precession, a slow wobble in the Earth's axis. If you're watching carefully, you'll notice that constellations don't stay exactly the same forever. A civilization with patience would have observed these shifts and understood that the universe itself was not fixed, but moving. That knowledge alone might have been enough to stir a new kind of curiosity. If the stars change, then perhaps we can change too. If the heavens are in motion, maybe we should be as well. We often think of ancient stories about the stars as symbolic, but they may have been more practical than we realize. A myth about a hunter chasing animals across the sky is also a seasonal calendar for hunting on Earth. A story about a goddess descending from the heavens might double as a reminder of when a particular star rises. For a lost civilization, such myths might have encoded far more complex knowledge. They could have woven navigation charts into their folklore, hiding practical instructions in stories that lasted long enough to be remembered, even after tools and texts were gone. What remains for us might be fragments of that knowledge, stripped of context, retold as legends. We might be reading the afterglow of maps that once guided people not only across seas, but across space. And then there's the question of how much they could have known about the planets themselves. Even without telescopes, you can see that certain lights move differently. The Greeks called them wandering stars, planets that shift against the backdrop of fixed constellations. Mars grows bright and red, then dims. Jupiter lumbers across the sky, bringing its moons into view with even a simple lens. Venus dazzles at dawn and dusk, always tied closely to the sun's glow. With time and patience, a careful observer can figure out their cycles and sense their distances. If the first civilization studied them with sharper instruments or longer patience, they might have known much more. Perhaps they had charts of orbital paths. Perhaps they saw the planets as stepping stones rather than mysteries. It's tempting to think that using the sky as a map is just metaphor, but in truth it has always been literal. Sailors on open seas steered by Polaris, farmers planted by lunar phases, rituals aligned to solstices. Even today, our satellites, GPS systems and calendars still rely on celestial cycles, only measured with atomic precision instead of naked eyes. For a civilization seeking to leave Earth, those cycles would have been more than traditions. They would have been coordinates, launch windows, orbital mechanics, interplanetary slingshots. These are advanced concepts we only named recently, but the sky itself reveals them to anyone who watches closely enough for long enough. Imagine them sitting under the same stars we see, charting their movements, marking their rhythms, and slowly realizing that these weren't just lights, but directions. The Milky Way might not have been only a river in the sky, but a road, a path leading outward. They may have seen themselves not as bound to Earth, but as one part of a larger system already mapped out for them by the heavens. The sky doesn't just inspire, it instructs. And once you see it that way, leaving Earth doesn't feel random, it feels guided. The stars become both compass and destination. The planets become both neighbors and steps. The cosmos stops being background scenery and starts being a chart waiting to be followed. If they had the will and the means, then perhaps they followed it. We sometimes underestimate how much can be done with patient observation. Long before telescopes, people already predicted eclipses, tracked planetary alignments, and calculated the length of a year with astonishing accuracy. With enough generations committed to the task, a civilization could piece together the mechanics of the solar system, and from there imagine how to step into it. Their sky maps may have been more advanced than anything we've uncovered. They may have drawn routes to Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, or beyond, long before we even dreamed of rockets. Even today, when we send probes to other planets, we rely on the same principles. We time launches to take advantage of planetary positions. We use gravity assists, slingshotting around planets to gain speed. We map trajectories with the same sky that once guided shepherds and sailors. The only difference is scale and precision, which means that if they once looked up and saw what we see, the path was there waiting. The only question was whether they chose to follow it. And that brings us to a quiet realization. If a first civilization did exist, and if they chose to leave, the sky may have been their most important teacher. Every pattern, every cycle, every shift in light would have been part of a curriculum that prepared them for departure. The heavens would not have been distant. They would have been home, extended outward. Looking up would have meant looking forward. The thought lingers, doesn't it? That every time we look at the stars today, we may be tracing not only our own possible future, but their actual past. That their eyes once followed Orion, or counted the moons of Jupiter, or marveled at Saturn's rings. That for them the sky was not just a wonder but a map, and that they used it to chart their way into the unknown. And as we lie beneath it now, listening, resting, wondering, the same map is still there, unchanged, waiting for whoever chooses to follow it next. If we're going to picture the first civilization leaving Earth, we can't help but wonder what they left in. No departure is possible without vessels. No journey without some form of transport. When we think of ships today, we picture rockets, sleek capsules wrapped in metal, engines blazing with controlled fire that push a fragile cargo into orbit. But those are the ships of our time. Theirs would not have looked like ours. They may have seemed strange to us, unrecognizable even, built from materials we wouldn't expect or powered by forces we don't yet know how to harness. Still, to imagine them, we have to begin somewhere, and the most natural place to begin is with what we know. Our earliest ships on Earth weren't machines of fire and steel. They were rafts and canoes, hollowed logs pushed across rivers, stitched hides stretched over frames, stones balanced carefully to carry fire from one shore to another. The first ocean crossings didn't depend on engines, but on patience and courage. Maybe their spacefaring craft weren't so different in spirit. They might not have looked like shining rockets from a science fiction illustration, but more like extensions of what they already understood. Perhaps vast, heavy structures, slow but steady, built not for speed but for endurance. In a sense, ships of stone, not literally carved from granite, but immense, durable, designed to last across generations rather than minutes. It's easy to think of rockets as the only way into space, but rockets are really just one solution among many. They work for us because we're at the beginning of our journey, impatient, still fumbling with chemistry and engineering. For a civilization older or wiser, their ships might have been entirely different. Some scientists today talk about space elevators, tethers stretching from Earth's surface to orbit, allowing materials to climb like freight along a railway into the sky. Others imagine giant rail guns or launch loops that fling cargo upward without fuel. These ideas seem distant to us, but if they're already sketched in our notebooks, perhaps the first civilization built them long ago. To us, it would look like magic. To them, it would have been infrastructure. And then there's the fire. Every journey into the heavens has begun with fire. Fire lifted the first hot air balloons. Fire boiled the engines of steamships. Fire roars beneath every rocket that leaves Earth today. Perhaps their technology too began with fire, controlled explosions, chemical reactions, plasma jets, or something more refined, but still carrying that same essence of concentrated energy unleashed in a single direction. Fire that does not consume, but carries. Fire not bound to wood or coal, but drawn from deeper sources. Fusion, fission, or perhaps something we don't yet have words for. To us it would look like miracles. To them it may have been simple utility. It's possible they did not rely on rockets at all. They might have mastered nuclear propulsion, harnessed magnetic fields, or tapped into antimatter. These are ideas we whisper about today in speculative physics papers, concepts with sketches and equations, but no working models. Imagine if they had the time and patience to build them. A ship powered by fusion could burn as long as a star, traveling not in bursts, but in steady acceleration. A craft built with shielding of unimaginable strength could endure the slow passage between stars, carrying its people as though in a moving city. The sky itself might have been filled with vessels not unlike floating islands, drifting outward bit by bit, never rushing but never stopping. Some imagine ships that are alive in some sense, not built of metal but grown. Biological vessels shaped the way we shape plants or animals. If they had knowledge of genetics or bioengineering far beyond ours, maybe they created living ships, self-repairing, able to recycle resources endlessly, a forest in space, guided and steered, carrying its caretakers with it. To us, it would sound like fantasy. To them, it might have been the obvious choice. A ship of stone for strength, a ship of fire for power, a ship of life for continuity. We can also think of scale. Our rockets are small, cramped, uncomfortable. They are designed for short trips. But if your goal is to leave Earth forever, you don't build tiny capsules. You build arcs, massive structures with room for thousands, carrying ecosystems, archives, and the tools of continuity. The size of such vessels would defy our imagination. They could have been visible from the ground, bright shapes crawling into orbit, hanging like new stars before drifting away. If they left in such ships, perhaps some distant part of the universe still carries them, generations later, living not on planets, but within vessels that have become worlds themselves. The phrase, ships of stone and fire, reminds us that what seems primitive to us might have been advanced to them, and what seems advanced to us might look primitive to them. If they built in stone, perhaps it was because stone endures where metals corrode. If they carried fire, perhaps it was because fire is simple, reliable, universal. Technology doesn't always move in straight lines. It adapts to what is available, to what works, to what can last. Their ships may have looked ancient to our eyes, like floating fortresses, while being far beyond anything we could build. There's also the question of secrecy. If they left, how did they do it without leaving traces we can clearly see? Perhaps their ships were designed to vanish, to break apart, to recycle themselves into dust once their mission was complete. Maybe they took their launch platforms with them, or buried them deep, or disguised them as natural formations. If the Earth is good at erasing history, a civilization might have helped it along, ensuring that nothing obvious remained. From our perspective, the technology seems invisible. From theirs, it might simply have been well hidden. When we look at our own path into space, we see how many false starts and failures accompany each success. Rockets explode, probes go silent, missions fall short, but over time progress accumulates. If they had far longer than we have, their failures may have been forgotten, their successes refined into stability. They could have built craft that no longer depended on fragile engines or risky launches, but instead used methods so reliable that leaving Earth became routine. For us, it is an extraordinary event. For them, perhaps it was as ordinary as setting sail across a bay. And once they left, their ships may have taken on new identities, not just vehicles, but homes, places where generations lived and died, where memories accumulated. To leave Earth in such ships would be to create a moving civilization, one that carried its culture, its knowledge, its traditions across space. These ships of stone and fire may not have been temporary at all. They may have been the first true worlds of that people, the cradles from which they spread into the cosmos. When you try to picture them, don't think only of rockets and engines. Think of floating forests, glowing arcs of plasma, vast rotating cylinders generating gravity through motion. Think of vessels that looked more like planets than ships, carrying entire landscapes inside them. Think of machines that were less like vehicles and more like ecosystems, alive in their own way, designed not just to move but to last. The technology could have been mechanical, biological, or something in between. Whatever it was, it carried them far enough that we no longer see them. And that absence again is part of the story. If they built ships of stone, fire, or life, None remain here for us to find. The earth is silent, but silence doesn't mean emptiness. It only means they succeeded in leaving. Somewhere out there, their ships may still drift, still carry, still live, and every time we light a rocket, every time we sketch designs for ships that might one day cross the stars, we echo them, repeating steps they may have taken long ago. The thought lingers when we imagine ships of stone and fire. Maybe we are remembering something older than ourselves. Maybe the future we picture for our species is already the past for another, and maybe in time we will follow their path, building vessels that seem impossible now but inevitable later, carving our own way into the dark, guided by the same needs, the same hopes, the same unyielding drive to leave the shore behind. When you imagine a people leaving Earth behind, the mind naturally wonders about their destination. Space is vast, dark, and often described as empty, though in truth it is filled with more stars and worlds than we could ever count. If the first civilization really did build their ships of stone and fire, their journey must have had an aim, whether clear or uncertain. They would not have simply sailed into the void without some sense of direction. The question is, where could they have gone, and what would have drawn them outward? The most obvious answer lies close at hand, within the familiar circle of our own solar system. Before reaching for distant suns, perhaps their first steps were toward the neighbors we still dream of today. The moon would have been the nearest shore, a body that hangs so visibly in our sky, it almost feels like an invitation. Its surface is barren, silent and harsh, but it is reachable. Even with our limited means, humans have set foot there. For a civilization ahead of us, the moon may have been not just a goal, but a staging ground, a place to build, mine, and prepare for journeys beyond. Its dust and craters could have hidden bases, observatories, or shipyards. Over millions of years, any trace of such activity would vanish under impacts and erosion from micrometeorites, leaving only speculation behind. From there, Mars would have been the next logical step, a world with valleys, mountains, and polar caps, a world that once held water and perhaps life. If the first civilization was skilled enough, Mars might have seemed like an unfinished Earth, waiting for hands to shape it. They could have carved habitats beneath the surface, shielding themselves from radiation, using ice and soil to build self-sustaining colonies. If they had time, they may even have transformed it, slowly terraforming its air and land. For us, Mars is still a dream. For them, it might have been a second home. And if they began such a process and then moved on, Mars today could be the quiet skeleton of their ambition, a planet half-formed, abandoned mid-project, leaving us to puzzle over what might have been. The outer planets, too, could have held a lure. Jupiter with its vast moons, each a world of its own. Europa with its ocean under ice might have been seen as a cradle for new life. Ganymede and Callisto, larger than Mercury, could have offered space for settlements protected under thick shells of rock and water. Saturn's moons like Titan, with its lakes of methane, may have fascinated them. Exotic, but rich with possibilities. To a people determined to endure, these moons would have been stepping stones, places to pause and build while preparing for longer journeys. Their footprints could be buried beneath ice, hidden from our gaze, but present in ways we can't yet detect. Beyond the solar system, the choices multiply endlessly. Every star in the night sky could be a destination. Even the closest Proxima Centauri lies a daunting distance away, but to a people willing to invest generations, it is within reach. If their ships were vast and durable, they may have launched toward the nearest stars, scattering like seeds across interstellar space. Each new system they reached would have offered planets, asteroids, and resources to build with. Colonies could have spread like ripples, one system at a time, slowly unfolding into a network that spanned light years. If that happened, then somewhere out there, perhaps not far by cosmic standards, there may still be descendants of that first departure living in places we have not yet learned to see. But what would they have been searching for? Survival alone might explain it, but perhaps there was more. Maybe they sought a planet like Earth, a twin world where they could rebuild what they left behind. Astronomers today search for such exoplanets, scanning starlight for signs of atmospheres, water, or chemical fingerprints of life. We've already found thousands of planets orbiting distant suns. A first civilization might have done the same with their own tools, mapping the sky not just as myth, but as opportunity. With enough patience, they could have chosen carefully, targeting only the most promising worlds. If they succeeded, then out there, orbiting another star, there might be a planet where their cities still stand, where their descendants still walk, carrying with them the memory of an Earth they no longer visit. It's also possible their goals were less specific. Some journeys begin not with a destination, but with the simple desire to move, to wander, to see what lies ahead. If their culture valued exploration as highly as we value permanence, they may not have needed a clear target. The act of leaving, of expanding, could have been enough. Their ships may have drifted generation after generation, becoming self-contained worlds that no longer sought planets at all. Instead, they could have lived among the stars themselves, building habitats from asteroids, turning the raw material of space into homes. This vision is not unfamiliar to us. Engineers talk about O'Neill cylinders, giant rotating structures that simulate gravity. Science fiction imagines Dyson spheres, colossal frameworks that harness the energy of entire stars. For us, these are dreams. For them, they may have been realities. If so, their footprints are not on planets, but scattered in space, hidden among the stars like pearls too faint for us to see. There's another possibility, one both simple and unsettling. What if they left, but not far? Perhaps they built stations in orbit, cities that circled Earth long after their departure, eventually drifting or falling silent. Over millions of years, such structures would decay, crumble, or crash, leaving little behind. But if some fragments remain buried in the upper layers of atmosphere or hidden on distant moons, they may one day be uncovered. If we find something like that, it would not just be a footprint among the stars. It would be a reminder that the stars begin closer than we think, just beyond our own sky. We might also consider that their departure wasn't uniform. Not everyone may have gone. Some could have stayed behind, choosing the familiarity of Earth, blending back into its rhythms, while others sailed outward. If that's true, then perhaps traces of their knowledge, their stories, even fragments of their identity lingered here, passed down, transformed, and eventually woven into our own. We may carry echoes of them not in ruins, but in our own cultures, in the myths that speak of sky beings, in the stories that imagine returns from the stars. Their footprints could be hidden not in stone or soil, but in memory. As we ask where they might have gone, we also notice how much this question mirrors our own. When we imagine humanity leaving Earth, we talk about many of the same destinations: the Moon, Mars, the outer planets, exoplanets, generation ships, orbital habitats. We are in effect rehearsing their choices. We follow the same logic: start nearby, then expand outward, then eventually scatter. It's humbling to think that our dreams may be shadows of their achievements, that our speculations may be echoes of their history. And so we find ourselves staring at the sky differently. Each star becomes a question, each planet a possibility, each patch of silence a reminder that if they did leave, they could be anywhere, everywhere, or nowhere near. The footprints among the stars may not be obvious. They may not be visible in telescopes or detectable in signals. They may only be felt in the quiet thought that we're not necessarily first and not necessarily alone. The stars we see tonight are the same stars they would have seen. The constellations may have shifted slowly, but the light remains, carrying with it the same promise of destinations. For them, the stars were not unreachable. They were maps, markers, places to go. For us, they still are. And as we sit beneath them now, listening, imagining, we might be retracing steps already taken, following footprints that stretch into the dark, still visible in ways we don't yet recognize. If there truly was a civilization before us, one that lifted itself into the sky and stepped out into the greater universe, then the question follows almost immediately. Why don't we hear from them? Why don't we see signals crossing the dark or machines lingering in orbit, or even some kind of message meant for us, a note left behind like a key under the mat? The silence is striking. For a species like ours used to noise and chatter, silence can feel like absence. But is it? Or is silence sometimes its own kind of communication? We've been listening to the cosmos for decades now, straining our instruments for the faintest signal that might carry proof of intelligence elsewhere. Radio telescopes sweep the sky, and satellites look for anomalies in light and energy. And yet across all that listening, we've found nothing conclusive. No greetings, no beacons, no signals strong enough to erase all doubt. The universe hums with natural sounds, the hiss of background radiation, the flare of pulsars, the whisper of galaxies spinning, but no clear voice calls across the void. Some call this the Great Silence. Others call it the paradox of expectation. If civilizations arise, why don't they speak? Now imagine that the first civilization was once here, on this very planet, and they left. The silence becomes sharper. If they began on Earth, wouldn't we expect to find some sign? If not structures, then signals. If not signals, then traces in myths, codes, artifacts, or instructions. But instead, we hear nothing, nothing but the quiet rhythm of our own lives, the turning of Earth, the distant hum of stars. That absence could mean many things, and each possibility tells us something different about them, and perhaps about ourselves. One explanation might be that they simply chose not to speak. Silence could have been deliberate. Perhaps they understood that contact across the stars is dangerous. Perhaps they knew the risk of being heard by unfriendly ears, or they valued their own privacy, or they believed each civilization must walk its own path without interference. Silence might have been a kind of respect, leaving space for others to grow without guidance or influence. If they saw themselves as caretakers or guardians, they may have known that to speak would alter us, and so they withheld their voice. Another explanation could be that we are not listening in the right way. Our methods of communication are specific, tied to radio waves, narrow bands of light, bursts of energy we know how to detect. But a civilization millions of years older than us might have used entirely different methods. They might have moved past radio, past signals, past technologies we can even imagine. To them, our ears may be tuned to silence while their voices are too high or too low for us to catch. Imagine a whale calling in the depths of the ocean while we stand on the shore with microphones pointed at the sky. The sound is there, rich and powerful, but we have no way to hear it. Silence in that case is not the absence of communication, but the absence of comprehension. It could also be that distance itself has swallowed their voices. Even at the speed of light, signals take years, centuries, millennia to travel between stars. If they left long ago, their messages might still be in transit, somewhere between us and them, not yet arrived, or long since passed. We may be living in a gap, a quiet interval where the echoes haven't reached us, or perhaps the signals have faded, dissipated, or been distorted by time and space. The universe is not kind to fragile transmissions. Over millions of years, even the strongest beacon may become a faint whisper, indistinguishable from the background noise of creation. There's also the possibility that their silence is not chosen, but inevitable. Civilizations, like species, may not last forever. If they left Earth, spread outward, and built among the stars, they may have thrived for a time, perhaps for ages longer than we can imagine. But entropy has its way. Stars die, resources thin, societies change. Perhaps they are gone now, their voices silenced by the natural ebb of time. The silence we hear would not be deliberate, but final. If that's the case, then listening to the cosmos is like standing in an empty hall, hearing only echoes of what once was, without knowing if anyone will return. The silence might also be our own doing. It's possible that we found traces without recognizing them, dismissed signals as noise, overlooked anomalies as errors. Our instruments are limited, our attention span short. A civilization capable of leaving Earth might have left messages all around us, in patterns of light, in cosmic structures, in the very chemistry of life, and we might simply not know how to read them. Silence in this sense could be an illusion, a misunderstanding of what communication looks like when it is written on a scale larger than we are used to. And then there's a more haunting possibility. What if they didn't want to be remembered at all? What if departure was not only physical but intentional erasure? They may have wiped their traces, dismantled their machines, buried their knowledge, and left Earth clean, ready for whatever came next. To them, silence might have been part of the plan, a way of leaving no distractions for those who would follow. In that case, this silence is not absence, but design. We were never meant to hear them, never meant to know they existed. Whatever the reason, the silence shapes us. It makes us wonder, it keeps us searching. It sharpens our sense of mystery. Sometimes silence is not a lack, but a gift, a space where imagination can breathe. If they were out there, and if they are still out there now, perhaps they know this. Perhaps they understand that silence invites us to listen, to learn, to prepare in ways that noise never could. Think of how silence works in our own lives. A pause in music creates anticipation. A moment of quiet in conversation deepens meaning. The silence of a night sky makes the stars shine brighter. In the same way, the silence of the universe may make our search more profound, our discoveries more precious. If the first civilization left Earth and left no sound behind, they may have done us an unintended favor, giving us the chance to rediscover curiosity for ourselves rather than handing us answers. And so we listen. We build bigger telescopes, sharper detectors, faster computers, all in the hope that one day the silence will break. Maybe it never will. Maybe that's the point. But in the waiting, in the absence, in the quiet stretching between us and the stars, we learn something about patience, about humility, about the scale of time and possibility. The silence is not empty. It is filled with potential. The first civilization, wherever they are or were, might not hear us either. Perhaps they too once strained for signals and found none. Perhaps they too wondered about silence. If so, then in this strange way, silence is the thread that connects us. We listen, they listened, and somewhere in that listening we are not so different. When history leaves no artifacts, when the soil yields no tools and the rocks give no buildings, sometimes the only places left to look are in the stories people tell. Myths and legends have always been with us, drifting across generations like shadows that never fully fade. They are not textbooks, not reliable records in the way we'd like them to be, but they are sticky. They cling to memory, and sometimes hidden among their exaggerations and symbols, there are fragments of truth that reach farther back than we expect. If there really was a civilization before us, one that looked to the stars, not just as symbols but as destinations, it's possible that the only evidence left behind is not carved in stone, but whispered in stories, passed down until the original meaning blurred into myth. Every culture on Earth has sky stories. Some tell of gods who came down from above, others tell of ancestors who rose into the heavens. Many describe battles in the sky, chariots of fire, thunderbirds, or beings who taught humanity secrets before departing again. The patterns repeat across continents, across centuries, across languages that never touched one another. To most scholars, these are symbols of natural phenomena, attempts to explain lightning, comets, eclipses, or the vast unknown above. And perhaps that's all they are. But if we open the door to another possibility, we might wonder whether these stories are the faint echoes of something real, encounters with those who had already learned to step into the sky and who left behind not monuments, but memories. Think about how oral tradition works. A single story told again and again can survive for hundreds of generations. Details change, embellishments grow, but the core endures. Scientists studying Aboriginal stories in Australia have found that some tales preserve memories of landscapes as they were more than 10,000 years ago, describing coastlines that are now underwater after sea levels rose. That's not imagination. That's history carried in story. If memory can stretch that far in human cultures, then how much further could it stretch if it carried echoes of something more extraordinary, like the sight of machines in the sky or teachers who came from beyond? Over millennia, the stories could have softened into myth, their literal truth forgotten, but their shapes remaining. Consider the legend of Atlantis, spoken by Plato, said to have been a great civilization that vanished into the sea. Scholars usually interpret it as allegory, a story meant to illustrate pride, hubris, or the fragility of society. But stories of lost civilizations appear in many places. Flood myths, sunken kingdoms, golden ages cut short. Could they be cultural memories of something older? Perhaps not a city swallowed by water, but a people swallowed by the sky. The sea and the stars both represent vast, unreachable frontiers. In story, the two sometimes blend. A civilization disappearing into one may be an echo of departure into the other. In Mesoamerican traditions, the gods are often described as coming from the heavens, teaching agriculture, writing, astronomy. The feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl departs with a promise to return. In ancient Sumerian myths, beings known as the Anunnaki descend from the skies and interact with humanity. In Polynesian lore, great navigators are said to have been guided by star beings. Across the world, the sky is not empty. It is filled with characters who descend, instruct, and then vanish upward again. The pattern is striking, and while it may well be the work of imagination, it also leaves room for speculation. If a civilization once left Earth, might they have also returned briefly or left behind fragments of themselves, inspiring stories that outlive their presence? Of course, myths also serve other purposes. They explain the unknown, they bind communities, they offer moral lessons. We can't simply read them as history, but even within their symbolism, they may contain fragments of observation. A story about a fiery chariot might be a way of describing a streak across the sky, a comet or meteor, or perhaps something technological. A tale of sky gods might be a way of interpreting contact with outsiders. Myths work like palimpsests, layers written over one another, carrying both invention and memory. Archaeology usually digs through soil to find layers of history. Here we dig through story. Even in modern times, stories persist about lights in the sky, strange visitors, unexplained phenomena. Most of these are dismissed as errors, illusions, or fiction. But the persistence is interesting. It suggests that the human mind is always inclined to imagine contact, always inclined to populate the sky with presence. If the first civilization left Earth, perhaps this inclination is more than imagination. Perhaps it is inheritance. We look to the sky with the same reflex they once had, not because it is empty, but because deep down we know it has been occupied before. The challenge with reading myths as evidence is that they are so pliable, you can interpret them endlessly. But that is also their power. Unlike stone tools that wear down or bones that decay, stories adapt, evolve, survive. They can carry meaning across epochs where physical traces fail. Archaeology of the soil can tell us much about what humans did. Archaeology of the sky through myth and legend can hint at what humans saw and imagined. And if some of those imaginations were rooted in real events, then we may be holding fragments of the first civilization's story without realizing it. Think also about constellations. Different cultures separated by oceans often created surprisingly similar patterns from the same stars. The hunter, the bull, the scorpion. Some of these figures may be coincidences, but others may reflect older traditions, shared memories of how the sky was once read. If the first civilization mapped the stars and passed those maps down, later cultures may have inherited distorted versions of them, turning coordinates into characters, navigation into mythology. The sky itself may be a kind of archive, its patterns holding not only scientific meaning, but cultural memory that outlives the people who first inscribed it. And then there are the monuments on Earth that align with the sky, Stonehenge marking solstices, pyramids aligned with Orion, temples oriented to Sirius. These structures are both architectural feats and astronomical tools, embedding knowledge of the heavens into stone. If humans of our known history were already doing this, why not an earlier civilization? Perhaps they built their own markers, now erased by time, or perhaps their influence lingered in the way later societies aligned their monuments. Even if the structures are newer, the tradition of linking sky and stone could have been inherited from deeper origins. We may never know which myths carry genuine echoes of history and which are purely invention, but the possibility itself is meaningful. It reminds us that history is not only written in books or carved in ruins, sometimes it is whispered across campfires, sung in rituals, or painted in the sky with words that outlive their literal meaning. If the first civilization left Earth, the only trace they may have left behind is not material, but cultural, embedded in the stories we still tell, the legends that refuse to die. And so we listen to myths with a slightly different ear, not as literal records, not as proof, but as clues, as shadows. The archaeology of the sky may not yield bones or artifacts, but it may reveal patterns, connections, echoes. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is how memory survives when everything else is gone. And as we sit beneath the stars, hearing old stories retold, the thought comes gently. Maybe myths are not just entertainment. Maybe they are the footprints of those who came before, faint but enduring, waiting for us to recognize them. If a civilization did rise on Earth before us, one capable of building ships and leaving for the stars, then it's natural to ask whether they might have left us more than silence. Absence alone is intriguing, but humans are always looking for threads to connect, clues to tie the unknown to what we already know. And sometimes in the quiet corners of thought, the idea surfaces that perhaps they didn't vanish completely. Perhaps they left behind something subtle, something woven into the fabric of our own progress, a hidden blueprint that nudges us forward. When people talk about blueprints, they usually mean detailed plans, drawings, instructions, guides for construction, but blueprints don't have to be literal. They can be ideas, patterns, seeds planted in memory, or in culture that grow long after their origin is forgotten. If the first civilization knew they were leaving, they might have worried about what would happen here after their departure. Would Earth stay empty? Would life continue without them? Would another intelligent species eventually rise? Perhaps they wanted to leave a gift, not a monument, but a roadmap, so that when the next intelligence awoke, it wouldn't start entirely from scratch. It's not such an outlandish thought. Even in our short history, we've already begun doing something similar. We send probes into space carrying golden records with music, images, and instructions about who we are. We place time capsules in the ground filled with artifacts meant for future generations. We store seeds in frozen vaults at the edge of the world to preserve biodiversity against disaster. If we're already leaving blueprints for those who come after, why wouldn't they? A civilization far older and wiser might have done the same, leaving behind hints meant not to overwhelm us, but to guide us gently, letting us find our way while following paths they already walked. Some people look at sudden leaps in human development and wonder if they are evidence of such gifts. The invention of agriculture, the rise of writing, the spread of mathematics, the sudden flowering of architecture and astronomy in multiple places at once. To most scholars, these can be explained by cultural exchange, necessity, the natural progression of human thought. But for those who entertain the possibility of hidden blueprints, these leaps look almost like nudges, as if knowledge was seeded at the right moments, not handed down fully formed, but introduced just enough to grow naturally in the societies that received it. Writing itself is one of the most striking examples, from Sumerian cuneiform to Egyptian hieroglyphs, to the scripts of the Indus Valley in China. complex systems of symbols emerged that transformed memory into permanence. Oral traditions could stretch across centuries, but writing made ideas travel across millennia. Some myths even describe writing as a gift from the gods, or from sky beings, or from figures who descended briefly to teach. To us, these are myths. To others, they might be faint memories of contact, of a blueprint handed down. Mathematics tells a similar story. Numbers, geometry, and astronomy appeared in different parts of the world, often with striking sophistication. The Babylonians tracked planetary movements with incredible accuracy. The Maya calculated cycles of Venus that rival modern methods. Ancient builders aligned temples with solstices, designed pyramids with precision that still puzzles us. Were these simply the achievements of brilliant human minds, or were they guided by older patterns, blueprints embedded in culture long before we understood their origins? Even myths themselves could serve as blueprints. A story that survives long enough becomes more than entertainment. It becomes instruction. Tales of floods might remind communities to prepare for rising waters. Legends of fire from the sky might preserve memories of meteor impacts. Stories of beings who descended from above and taught agriculture could encode instructions for farming, passed down across ages. If myths were shaped by a first civilization, then perhaps their purpose was practical, to give us tools disguised as stories, lessons hidden in symbols, guidance without explanation. There's also the possibility of more direct gifts. Perhaps they left behind physical blueprints, artifacts, machines, or structures designed to last and to be discovered at the right time. We've yet to find anything we can confirm as such, but the idea lingers. What if some ancient monuments were not only ceremonial but also instructional, encoding knowledge in stone? What if patterns in geometry or astronomy were left deliberately, waiting for us to notice? We often describe ancient wonders as mysteries, the Great Pyramid, Stonehenge, the Nazca lines. While we can explain much of them, there are always gaps. Could those gaps be intentional? Spaces left for us to fill once we reach the right level of understanding. Some even wonder whether the blueprint lies deeper still. Not in monuments or myths, but in us, in our very biology. Could the first civilization have shaped the genetic material of life, leaving behind instructions coded in DNA? It sounds fantastical, but DNA itself is a blueprint, a language of information written in chemical form. We're only beginning to read it. What if hidden in the spirals of our genes, there are patterns not yet recognized, markers that say we're not only products of evolution, but also inheritors of intention? If they had the ability, perhaps they seeded Earth with life designed to eventually rise again, carrying echoes of themselves. In that sense, we wouldn't just be successors to the first civilization, we would be their legacy, their blueprint, walking, thinking, and dreaming. Of course, all of this remains speculation. There is no definitive proof, no artifact we can point to and say, here, this is the gift they left. But speculation itself can be a kind of blueprint too. It drives us to search, to question, to push beyond the obvious. And even if no hidden blueprints were left behind, the idea that they could have been is enough to spark imagination. Sometimes the greatest gifts are not answers, but questions. Think of how we design technology today. Our devices are filled with layers of abstraction, code upon code, instructions hidden beneath interfaces so simple a child can use them. But somewhere in that simplicity lies complexity waiting to be uncovered. What if our own civilization has been given something similar? Knowledge wrapped in myths, in culture, in memory, in DNA, blueprints that look simple until we are ready to peel back their layers and discover more. And so we carry on, building, inventing, discovering. Each new step we take feels like our own, but what if they are also echoes? What if we're walking along paths designed long before us, guided by blueprints we don't even know we're following? The thought is humbling, but also comforting. It suggests that we're not entirely alone, that even in silence, even in absence, we're accompanied by a hand that reached forward across time to steady us. Whether or not that's true, The possibility itself enriches our view of history. It makes us look at myths differently, at monuments differently, at ourselves differently. It makes us wonder whether the first civilization, in leaving Earth, also left something behind, not obvious, not overwhelming, but quiet, subtle, hidden blueprints, not of stone or metal, but of story, idea, and memory, waiting patiently for us to notice. And maybe, just maybe, we already have. When we look at the night sky, it can feel like a canvas scattered with distant lights, each one unreachable, too far to matter. But over the last century, we've learned that those lights aren't just stars. Many of them have planets, and many of those planets may not be so different from our own. The universe, as it turns out, is not barren. It's fertile. It's a garden filled with worlds, some rocky, some icy, some shrouded in gas, some orbiting too close to their suns, others drifting in the cold between stars. The variety is staggering. But what's more staggering still is the sheer number. Billions of stars in our galaxy, billions of galaxies in the observable universe, and around them planets everywhere, waiting. If the first civilization left Earth, then these planets were their empty fields, the garden they could step into, the soil waiting to be seeded. We tend to think of Earth as unique, a rare cradle for life, and in some ways it is. But astronomers are finding that planets in habitable zones, the right distance from their stars for liquid water, are not rare at all. In fact, they may be common. With so many possibilities, the idea that we are the only world where life has flourished seems less like certainty and more like arrogance. For a civilization ready to leave Earth, the universe would not have looked empty. It would have looked inviting. Each planet a potential home, each moon a possibility, each orbit a chance to build. The cosmic garden would not have been something to fear. It would have been an opportunity. When farmers look at a field, they don't see bare soil. They see what it could become, the crops, the harvest, the future it can provide. In the same way, the first civilization may have looked at planets not as barren rocks, but as future worlds. Terraforming is a word we use today for reshaping a planet to make it habitable. Science fiction imagines it. Scientists debate it. Engineers sketch it in notebooks. But perhaps they did more than imagine. Perhaps they treated the galaxy itself as farmland, planting seeds of life where none existed, reshaping atmospheres, warming frozen ground, cooling overheated skies. If they had the time and knowledge, they might have turned the cosmic garden into a place where they could grow not crops, but civilizations. It doesn't have to mean they made every planet Earth-like. Some may have been adapted only partially, enough for outposts, enough for temporary colonies. Others may have been transformed fully, with oceans, forests, and skies thick with air. Some may have been left untouched, natural reserves preserved for their own beauty or their scientific value. Just as we tend gardens with variety, some fields planted, some left wild, they may have approached planets with a similar care. Not every world would need to be inhabited, but every world would have been part of the greater tapestry, part of the garden in which they spread. And if they saw planets as fields, then perhaps they also saw stars as seasons. Some stars burn hot and fast, lives measured in millions of years. Others glow steadily for billions, stable and generous. A civilization thinking on long time scales may have chosen carefully, settling near stars that promised endurance, avoiding those that would flare or fade too soon. They may have planted themselves in places we haven't even looked yet, around dim red dwarfs or golden suns, where stability lasts longer than our species has existed. For them, the cosmic garden would not have been chaotic. It would have been organized, mapped, understood, tended. It's strange to think of planets as waiting. Rocks and gas don't have intentions, but from our perspective they do seem to wait. They circle their stars year after year, silent, unused. We project meaning onto them because we know what life can do when given the chance. Earth was once just another planet until life filled it with forests, oceans, and thought. The same could happen elsewhere if given the right touch. If the first civilization left Earth, then perhaps part of their mission was not only to survive, but to spread life, to seed the cosmos. They may have seen themselves not as wanderers, but as gardeners, carrying with them the means to make barren soil fertile. Even the moons and asteroids might have been part of this. To us, they seem inhospitable, too small, too cold, too unstable. But with enough technology, those obstacles could be overcome. Domes, underground habitats, artificial atmospheres, all of these are within the realm of imagination even for us. For them, they may have been practical realities. Every rock, every field, every stone in the garden could serve a purpose, whether as a home, a resource, or a stepping stone on the way to somewhere else. The more you think about it, the more the silence we see in the stars begins to feel strange. If the galaxy is such a rich garden, why don't we see it teeming with evidence of cultivation? This is the heart of the Fermi paradox. If life can spread, why hasn't it spread everywhere? But if we entertain the possibility of the first civilization leaving Earth, the answer might be that it has. It's just that we are latecomers, still standing at the edge of the field, unable to see what has already been planted. The signs may be there, but beyond our instruments, beyond our distance, beyond our understanding, the garden may already be full. We're just too far from its center to notice. And yet, it's also possible they tended the garden differently. Maybe they avoided populating every world, leaving wide stretches untouched. Maybe they believed in quiet stewardship, not loud expansion. The gardener doesn't plant seeds in every patch of soil. They leave space, balance, order. If they carried that philosophy outward, they may have chosen carefully, filling only some worlds, leaving others silent. To us, it looks like emptiness. To them, it may have been intention. Another thought lingers. What if they saw Earth itself as only one field among many? We treat it as unique, sacred, irreplaceable, and it is to us. But to them, it may have been the beginning, the nursery, the first crop in a long chain. Leaving Earth may not have been abandonment, but expansion into the rest of the garden. We mourn the idea of losing our planet. They may have embraced the idea of gaining countless others. From their perspective, the garden was too vast to ignore. Staying in one field would have been like refusing to walk beyond a single row when acres stretched ahead. And so we find ourselves imagining them not as exiles or wanderers, but as caretakers of a cosmic garden. They left Earth not because it was unworthy, but because the rest of the universe was waiting, like soil rich with potential, like fields begging for growth. Their footprints then are not only on ships or stations, but on planets themselves, transformed by their touch, shaped by their vision. If we ever find life beyond Earth, we may wonder whether it is natural or cultivated, whether it grew by chance or was planted intentionally. The line between the two may blur, just as it already blurs here. For now, we stand at the garden's edge, still learning to recognize its scale. We plant small seeds, probes, telescopes, signals, and wait to see what grows. But if the first civilization walked here before us, then perhaps the garden is already theirs, already tended, already filled with stories we haven't yet learned to read. The planets are not empty, they are waiting, and maybe one day we will follow their path deeper into the fields and see for ourselves what was planted long ago. When we speak of civilizations, we tend to think in small spans of time, a few hundred years, a few thousand at most. We measure empires by their rise and fall, by the monuments they leave behind, by the pages written in their histories. But the Earth is older than any of those measures. It has spun for more than 4 billion years, carrying seas, continents, forests, and deserts through endless cycles of change. Against that backdrop, human history is little more than a blink. If we allow the possibility that a civilization came before us and left, then the question becomes not just whether they existed, but when. How long ago could they have departed? How much time has passed since their ships rose into the sky and disappeared into the wider universe? Time, when stretched across such scales, becomes slippery. We know that humans, as we are today, anatomically modern, have existed for roughly 200,000 years, but intelligent behavior, art, language, cities, only began to bloom in the last 10 or 20,000. Civilizations that we can trace, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, are only a few thousand years old, and yet the Earth's surface has been habitable for millions of years. That means there is a vast stretch of time, unimaginably long, in which intelligent beings could have risen, thrived, and disappeared before us, leaving no obvious traces. If we measure time as a river, then our history is only the foam on its surface, while the depths run far deeper than we can see. One way to think about it is to ask how much evidence would survive. If a civilization had risen 50,000 years ago and fallen, what would be left today? Wood rots, metal corrodes, stone erodes. Entire cities could crumble into dust and forests would reclaim the land. Even our tallest skyscrapers, left unattended, would collapse in a matter of centuries. In a few thousand years, all but the most stubborn monuments would vanish. In 10,000, even those would fade. In 1,000,000 years, plate tectonics would bury continents. Glaciers would scrape valleys clean. Volcanoes would erase landscapes. The river of time does not pause. It wears everything down, carrying away even the strongest evidence. So if they left long ago, there may be nothing left to see. The only proof would be absence. Geology tells us that the surface of Earth is constantly recycled. Ocean floors are born and destroyed. Mountains rise and erode. Continents drift like rafts across the mantle. In 100 million years, the face of the planet looks nothing like it did before. If a civilization existed 100 million years ago, it could have built cities, towers, even great machines, and the Earth itself would have swallowed them whole. We would not find a single trace. Our fossils show us dinosaurs, plants, shells, bones, shells, bones, but bones endure longer than steel. The fossils we find are rare survivors of chance, preserved under perfect conditions. Civilizations may not have such luck. Time is a river that carries away nearly everything. So how far back might we imagine them? Could they have existed before humans, in an age when other species ruled? If intelligence is not guaranteed but possible, it could have emerged more than once. Dinosaurs thrived for hundreds of millions of years. Some evolved complex behaviors. What if among them a species learned to think, to build, to look at the stars? They had more time than we've ever had. If even one branch had risen to intelligence, there could have been an entire civilization long before mammals took their turn. And when the asteroid struck, when ecosystems collapsed, maybe they had already left. Maybe their ships were already on their way, their departure timed not by accident but by foresight. Or perhaps they came more recently, in the long, quiet stretches of human prehistory. Archaeologists uncover stone tools from hundreds of thousands of years ago, but stone tells us little about what minds imagined. It is possible that advanced groups rose and fell without leaving behind clear records, even within human memory. Civilizations have vanished so completely that only fragments remain. Think of the Indus Valley, whose writing is still undeciphered. Think of cultures swallowed by deserts, jungles, or seas. If this happens in a few thousand years, what could happen in 100,000? The river of time smooths all edges until only hints remain. It's also worth remembering that civilizations don't need to be global. We imagine them spanning continents, but perhaps the first civilization was small, clustered in one region, advanced enough to build ships, but not widespread enough to leave global traces. If they departed, their homeland could have been erased by shifting landscapes, leaving no obvious evidence for us to uncover. We assume civilization must mean permanence, but perhaps theirs was brief, a spark that leapt quickly from Earth to the stars without lingering long enough to leave monuments. And then there is the scale of cosmic time. Our galaxy itself is more than 10 billion years old. Stars have been forming, shining, and dying since long before Earth existed. Life on Earth may be young compared to the possibilities in the universe. If civilizations can arise once, they can arise again. If one arose here, it may have been so long ago that its departure is beyond comprehension. We're used to thinking in human scales, decades, centuries, perhaps millennia. But what if they left not 10,000 years ago, not 1 million, but 100 million? What if they walked this same ground when the continents were in different places, when mountains we know had not yet risen, when seas we now cross were dry land? The river of time runs fast enough to wash away all certainty. And yet, even as it erases, it leaves patterns, fossils, myths, anomalies, unanswered questions. We can't say for sure how long ago they might have left, but the possibilities stretch from the edges of recorded history to the depths of geological time. Each possibility reshapes how we see ourselves. If they left recently, then perhaps their influence lingers, woven into our beginnings. If they left long ago, then we are truly on our own, inheriting a planet scrubbed clean of their memory. And maybe that's what makes this question so powerful. Time as a river reminds us not only of what has been lost, but also of what could return. Rivers don't just flow one way. They circle in currents. They branch and rejoin. If they left long ago, who is to say their descendants are not still traveling, still exploring, still circling back? The distance of time may not mean separation forever. It may only mean we are waiting for the next bend in the river, when paths cross again. Until then, all we can do is wonder, how long ago did they leave? 1,000 years, 10,000, 100 million. The river of time does not answer. It carries the truth away just beyond reach, leaving us to listen to the sound of its current and imagine what might have floated past before we ever arrived. When people think about contact across the stars, the first image that comes to mind is often of signals, bursts of energy, coded messages, streams of information traveling across the dark. We imagine civilizations speaking in radio, in light, in pulses designed to bridge distance. For decades we've listened for such voices, tilting great dishes toward the heavens, straining to catch a pattern that might prove we are not alone. And yet the silence remains. But silence doesn't mean absence. It could mean we haven't learned how to listen yet. Or perhaps it means the messages are there, drifting like bottles in an endless sea, waiting for the right eyes to find them. Think of a bottle tossed into the ocean. It is a desperate gesture, but also a hopeful one. Someone puts words on paper, seals them and sends them adrift, knowing that the chances of discovery are slim, but not impossible. The ocean swallows most, but every so often one washes up on a distant shore. If the first civilization left Earth, perhaps they did something similar, casting signals into the cosmic sea, not knowing who would find them or when. For all we know, some of those bottles may already have passed us by, their contents too faint for us to recognize. We've already begun sending our own bottles. In 1974, we transmitted the Arecibo message toward a cluster of stars, a brief broadcast encoded with simple information about humanity. The Voyager probes carry golden records etched with sounds and images meant to represent life on Earth. Other spacecraft have plaques showing the outlines of our bodies, our place in the galaxy, the structure of atoms. These are gestures, not conversations. We don't expect answers. We cast them into the sea because we cannot resist the urge to be heard. If we in our infancy do this already, then it's not hard to imagine that the first civilization did too, on scales far larger than ours. Signals don't have to be radio waves. They can be bursts of laser light, patterns in energy, structures built on astronomical scales that change how stars shine. They can even be biological, encoded in DNA, or hidden in mathematics. If the first civilization wanted to be found, they had countless options for leaving markers behind. They may have chosen the simplest, using natural phenomena as carriers. A pulsar's rhythm could be modulated, a star's brightness adjusted, a comet's orbit altered. To us, these would look like ordinary events unless we knew exactly what to look for. The message could be hidden in plain sight, disguised as nature. And yet, even if they sent messages, the vastness of space works against us. Signals weaken as they spread. A radio broadcast that fills our world with sound becomes a faint whisper. By the time it crosses a few dozen light years, unless it is sent deliberately with power and focus, it disappears into the background. For us, catching such whispers is like listening for a single drop of rain in a storm. If they left millions of years ago, their signals might already have passed, gone beyond our reach, fading into the endless noise of the universe. The bottles may still float, but far from our shore. There's another challenge too. Time, a signal sent a million years ago, might not reach us until long after the senders are gone. We could receive their words, but the speakers themselves may no longer exist. In that case, a message in a bottle is not the start of a conversation, but an artifact, a relic carried across time. We would not be speaking with them, we would be reading their ghosts. And perhaps that is what they intended. Perhaps they knew that time would erase them, but hoped their messages would endure, carrying fragments of themselves into the future. What would such a message contain? Would it be a greeting, a warning, a set of instructions? Or would it be something simpler, proof that they were there, that we're not alone? Our own golden records are modest. They contain music, greetings in many languages, sounds of life. They are not technical manuals or blueprints for survival. They are small gestures of culture, meant not to overwhelm but to introduce. If the first civilization thought in similar terms, then their bottles may be filled not with equations but with art, not with blueprints but with stories, messages not meant to teach us everything but simply to say, we existed. We looked at the same stars you do now. The thought is haunting because it means the signals may not be useful in the way we want them to be. We dream of receiving knowledge, answers to questions, cures for problems, shortcuts to technology. But what if the signals are more modest, more human? What if they are fragments of music, images of their world, the sound of their voices, the rhythm of their days, bottles carrying not instructions but memory? If we found such messages, would we even recognize them? Or would we dismiss them as noise, failing to see the human-like heart inside them? There's another possibility, stranger still. What if the messages were meant for us specifically? If they left Earth, they would have known that life might rise again here. They could have left beacons in orbit, signals coded into light, waiting to activate when the right conditions were met. These would not drift randomly but remain tied to us, waiting. If such messages exist, they may be hidden still, embedded in places we have not looked carefully enough. They may sit on the moon, buried under dust. They may orbit the Earth silently, disguised as stones. They may wait inside data we've already collected, overlooked because we were not ready to see. The bottles may not be drifting. They may be anchored, waiting for us to open them. We often think of messages as words, but not all communication needs language. A monument can be a message. A pattern in numbers can be a message. Even silence, deliberate silence, can be a message. If they left signals, they may not be transmissions at all. They may be patterns woven into the cosmos itself, structures or alignments that only an intelligent observer would notice. The question is whether we've been staring at the bottles all along without realizing they contain something inside. And perhaps the greatest challenge is that even if we find a message, understanding it may be impossible. Communication requires common ground, shared reference points. Without them, signals become noise. A civilization older than us by millions of years might think in ways we cannot grasp, encode meaning in ways that escape us entirely. We might hold the bottle in our hands, break the seal, and still never know what it says. But even then, the gesture itself would matter. The fact that a message exists at all would be proof that we are not alone in the cosmic sea. For now, all we can do is keep listening, keep casting our own bottles, Keep scanning the waves for any sign of presence. Each message we send is also a confession. We want to be found, and maybe the same is true of them. Maybe somewhere, drifting between stars, there are bottles carrying their voices, waiting for us to notice. And if one day we do, it won't just be a discovery, it will be a reunion, a moment where silence breaks and the sea gives back what it once swallowed. Until then, the bottles float, invisible, unknowable, but never absent. They are out there. We just have to learn how to find them. It is one of the strangest feelings to look up at the sky and realize how crowded it ought to be. The universe is not small. It is unimaginably vast, filled with stars that number in the billions just within our galaxy, with galaxies that number in the billions beyond that. Around those stars, planets circle, moons drift, systems flourish. The ingredients for life are everywhere: water, carbon, sunlight, energy. Nothing about Earth is unique in its chemistry. And yet, when we listen and when we look, we find only silence. The playground is enormous, filled with swings, slides, and endless open fields. And yet, no one else seems to be playing. Where is everyone? This is the paradox that has puzzled thinkers for generations. If life is possible, and if intelligence is not impossibly rare, then the galaxy should be alive with voices. Civilizations should be spreading, leaving traces, sending signals. We should see something, anything that proves we are not alone. But the evidence is missing. The playground is empty. The question becomes sharper when we imagine that the first civilization began here on Earth and left. If they stepped out into the stars long before us, then we should be surrounded by their descendants, their machines, their signals. Instead, we are alone. Perhaps the emptiness is only an illusion. The playground may not be empty at all. It may be full of life, full of civilizations, but we are too early or too late to see them. Imagine walking into a park at dawn. The swings are still, the benches are empty, but in just a few hours children will arrive, laughter will echo, and the air will fill with sound. Maybe we are, early in cosmic time. Civilizations are rare, just beginning to appear. And we are among the first. Or maybe we are late, arriving after the game ended when others have already played and gone home. The playground feels empty, but only because we're not in sync with the rest of the players. There's another way to look at it. Maybe the playground isn't empty, but quiet by choice. Imagine children playing hide and seek. They are present, but they remain silent, hidden, waiting, not wanting to be found. Civilizations may learn quickly that revealing themselves carries risk. If the universe is vast and survival uncertain, then broadcasting your presence could invite danger. Predators could be listening, waiting for signals to betray locations. In that case, silence becomes survival. The playground is full, but everyone is hiding, afraid to shout, afraid to sing. If the first civilization left Earth, maybe they learned this lesson and chose silence. If so, then their descendants may still be out there, playing quietly, avoiding us, leaving us to feel alone. The paradox grows deeper when we think about technology. If civilizations can travel between stars, it wouldn't take long on cosmic timescales to spread. Even moving slowly, within millions of years, a single civilization could fill the galaxy. Compared to the age of the universe, millions of years is a blink. So why don't we see them? Did they never spread? Did they spread and then collapse? Did they exist but never leave traces? Or are the traces there but beyond our ability to notice? The playground seems empty, but maybe the game they play isn't visible to us. Some thinkers suggest we might be looking in the wrong way. We expect civilizations to behave like us, building, transmitting, expanding, but perhaps intelligence expresses itself differently elsewhere. Maybe other civilizations don't build great machines, don't spread outward, don't leave marks we would recognize. Perhaps they live quietly in balance with their worlds, never needing to expand beyond them. Or perhaps they are so advanced that their presence looks like nature to us. What we see as ordinary stars, ordinary galaxies, might in fact be structures shaped by minds. Their work invisible because it blends so perfectly with the cosmos. In that case, the playground isn't empty. We simply don't recognize the players. And then there is the possibility that intelligence itself is fragile. Life may be common, but civilizations may burn bright and short. They rise, flourish, and collapse before they can spread widely. If so, the galaxy could be littered with ruins. Civilizations gone silent long before we began listening. The emptiness would not be real. It would be the echo of endings. If the first civilization left Earth, maybe they too fell victim to this pattern, disappearing somewhere beyond our reach, their descendants fading before we ever knew to look. The playground feels empty because the players are gone. It's worth considering too that maybe we are being spared. Perhaps other civilizations know we exist, but choose not to reveal themselves, believing that we are not ready. To them, silence may be kindness, a way of letting us grow without interference. Imagine older children at a playground watching younger ones play, choosing not to join in because it would change the game. The first civilization, if they were wise, may have left with the intention of giving us space, trusting that when we were ready, we would find them on our own. The emptiness is not a lack, but a waiting. Of course, there's always the darker answer. Perhaps the playground really is empty. Perhaps life is rarer than we think, intelligence rarer still, and we are truly alone. The chemistry may be simple, but the leap to consciousness may be nearly impossible. In that case, the silence of the stars is not paradox, but reality. The swings will never move. The slides will never echo because we are the only ones here. If that is true, then the first civilization never left because it never existed, or perhaps it did, but it was the only one, and we are its continuation, the single line of intelligence in an otherwise silent universe. Yet, even if that is true, it changes nothing about the feeling we carry. We look at the stars and sense potential. The playground calls to us because it looks like it should be full. Whether it is or not, we can't help but wonder. The paradox itself becomes a kind of mirror. It reflects our hopes, our fears, our longing for connection. It asks us to imagine, to search, to listen even when silence answers. And maybe that is the real point. The paradox does not exist to be solved, but to be lived with. It forces us to confront our place in the cosmos, to weigh the odds, to consider the scale of time and distance. It humbles us, reminding us that even if the playground is empty, the fact that we are here at all is astonishing. We are the children who arrived first, or perhaps the last, or perhaps the only ones. Either way, the swings are still waiting. The first civilization, if they truly left, may already know the answer. They may have seen the playground filled or empty, noisy or silent. They may have played their part and moved on, leaving us to face the paradox on our own. For us, the question remains open, unanswered, echoing each time we look at the stars and wonder why they shine so quietly. And so the playground stretches on, vast and endless, filled with silence that could mean absence, presence, waiting, or fear. We walk through it with our ears open, our eyes searching, and our hearts hoping that one day we'll see a swing move, hear a voice call out, and know that the paradox has finally resolved. Until then, the question remains, where is everyone? When you walk through an abandoned house, there are always traces of the lives that came before. A broken chair in the corner, faded paint on the wall, scratches in the floor where furniture once sat. Even when most of it is gone, you can feel the presence of those who lived there. Earth itself can sometimes feel like that house. It's full of life, full of history, full of stories written in stone and water and air. But if another civilization once lived here, one that rose before us and then departed, it's natural to wonder whether the world we call our own is not simply our beginning, but their inheritance, a place they left behind that we stepped into. Did we inherit their world? And if so, how much of what we see every day is shaped by their presence? The first thing to consider is the land itself. Earth is old, and its surface has been remade countless times. Continents drift, oceans rise and fall, mountains erode, glaciers carve valleys. This constant reshaping hides much of the past. But what if some of what we think of as natural isn't entirely natural? What if rivers that bend in curious patterns or plains that stretch too evenly aren't accidents of geology, but the faint remains of choices made long ago? We often assume landscapes are untouched until humans arrive, but maybe humans weren't the first to touch them. If another civilization existed, they might have farmed, mined, built, or reshaped the earth in ways that were later erased or disguised by time. We may walk across fields that once were gardens, not our own. And then there's the question of resources. Our civilization depends on fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, compressed remains of ancient life. We've burned them for centuries, reshaping our atmosphere in the process. But if another civilization came before us, what did they use? Did they also burn fuels, dig metals, extract minerals? And if so, did they deplete the richest deposits before leaving? Some scientists have pointed out that if another industrial civilization had existed millions of years ago, it might be hard to find evidence now. The fuels and ores we rely on might already have been tapped. What we consider natural scarcity might in fact be inheritance, the result of others using the earth before us. We live not on a fresh world, but on one already touched, already changed. Cultural inheritance may be even harder to see. If they left stories, myths, or fragments of knowledge behind, we may not recognize them for what they are. Our religions and legends are full of sky gods, teachers from above, heroes who depart and promise to return. We've already wondered whether these could be faint memories of real encounters, but even beyond story, maybe deeper influences remain. Certain instincts, certain drives, the pull toward the stars itself. Could these be echoes of their presence? Perhaps we dream of flight and exploration because we are inheriting not just a planet but a mindset, a direction passed down subtly through time. It's possible that inheritance goes even further into our very biology. Life on Earth is astonishingly complex, but DNA is also astonishingly precise, a code that carries not just survival, but possibility. If the first civilization had the ability, maybe they shaped that code, guiding evolution in ways we don't yet understand. In that case, we wouldn't just inherit their world, we would inherit their design. We might carry within us traces of their hand, echoes of their own form or thought embedded in our genes. That idea is unsettling, because it means we are not purely the product of chance. It means we might be their continuation, their children, carrying forward a legacy we don't remember. Of course, inheritance doesn't have to be intentional. It can also be accidental. Imagine them leaving behind waste, ruins, or changes to the climate. Over time, those traces might have altered the Earth's trajectory, shaping the world we inherited. Our atmosphere, our ecosystems, even the balance of species might reflect not only natural history, but also the actions of those who came before. We think of ourselves as the first to alter Earth on a global scale, but maybe we are only the second. Perhaps our world has been inherited twice, reshaped twice, changed twice. When archaeologists dig into ancient human sites, they often find layers upon layers, new cities built on old ones, new cultures growing over older foundations. Earth itself could be the same. Civilizations layered not in obvious ruins, but in subtler changes. We may be building our world on top of theirs without ever realizing it. Their fingerprints may be hidden in geology, in biology, in myth. The inheritance may be everywhere, but faint enough that we mistake it for nature. And then there's the psychological side of inheritance. If they left and if they knew others would follow, perhaps they wanted us to feel this pull, this sense of continuity. Maybe that's why we look at the stars with longing, why we dream of expansion, why we never stop searching. Perhaps the very drive to inherit Earth fully, to shape it, explore it, and eventually leave it, was planted by those who did the same. In that case, our inheritance is not just physical, but emotional, a deep restlessness that tells us we are part of something larger, a continuation of a story begun long before us. Yet we can also think about inheritance in another way, not as something given, but as something left behind unintentionally. If they abandoned Earth, they may not have meant to pass it on. They may have left it because it no longer suited them, because it had been exhausted, because they had no use for it. In that case, we are not heirs, but squatters, moving into a house someone else left behind. That thought changes how we see our place here. Are we caretakers of their abandoned home or rightful inheritors of the planet itself? The distinction may not matter practically, but emotionally it alters how we see ourselves. Either way, we're not starting from zero. Earth is old, shaped by forces older than us, perhaps older than human memory. Whether or not another civilization truly lived here before, we are inheritors of geology, of biology, of time itself. But if there really was someone before us, then we inherit more than that. We inherit their silence, their absence, their choices. We inherit a planet where their presence may still echo, faint, but real in ways we have not yet understood. The Earth we walk on is rich, layered, complex. To think of it as inheritance is to see ourselves differently, not as the first, but as the next. And maybe that is the truth. We're not at the beginning of the story. We're in the middle, walking paths already traveled, living in a house already built, carrying forward a world already shaped. The Earth we call ours may always have been theirs first. And if that is true, then the question becomes not whether we inherited their world, but what kind of heirs we will be. When people imagine inheritance from a civilization before us, the first thoughts go to monuments, to ruins, to myths, things we might find in the soil or the stories passed down. But there is another place where inheritance could live, a place much closer, a place so intimate it touches every living cell of our bodies. DNA, the code that writes life, the spiral ladder of molecules that carries instructions for who we are. We often think of it as natural, untouched, a record of evolution stretching back to the first simple organisms. But what if it is more than that? What if echoes of the first civilization linger within it, hidden in the very fabric of our biology? DNA is remarkable. With 4 simple letters, adenine, cytosine, guanine, thymine, it spells out instructions that build every plant, every animal, every human. It is both simple and infinite, a code that repeats yet never exhausts itself, and it endures. Fossilized remains may crumble, monuments may erode, but DNA can persist, copying itself across generations. It is the most resilient blueprint of all. If the first civilization wanted to leave something behind, something that would last longer than stone or steel, what better place than DNA? Some scientists already talk about the possibility of embedding information in genetic code. We have stored digital files inside DNA molecules, books, music, even films, proving that the spiral of life can double as a storage device. If we can do this now with our limited technology, then what might a civilization millions of years ahead of us have achieved? They might have woven instructions, stories, even memories into the genetic code of Earth itself, ensuring that life carries their presence forward even after their departure. We would not just inherit Earth, we would inherit them within ourselves. There are moments in our history where leaps in complexity appear mysteriously. The sudden jump from simple bacteria to complex eukaryotic cells, the appearance of multicellular organisms, the rapid spread of intelligence in humans. To us, these are steps in evolution shaped by chance and natural selection. But what if they were not entirely chance? What if they were nudges, guided changes, edits made by a civilization that wanted to ensure life did not stall? If so, then our very existence as conscious beings could be their legacy, the echo of their design. It's an unsettling thought because it blurs the line between natural and artificial. We like to imagine ourselves as products of nature, shaped by the earth alone. But if the first civilization altered the code, then we are not only natural, we are chosen, shaped, directed. We would be carrying within us traces of intentions long forgotten. We would be, in a sense, their descendants, even if we don't remember them. Every cell in our body would be an echo of their touch. Even without deliberate editing, it's possible they left traces unintentionally, if they were biological like us. If they lived and thrived on Earth for ages, their genetic material may have mingled with life around them. Just as humans carry fragments of Neanderthal DNA, maybe we carry fragments of something older still, pieces so ancient we no longer recognize them, folded into our genome, silent but present. Geneticists sometimes find stretches of DNA whose purpose is unclear, sequences that don't seem to code for anything useful. We call some of it junk. But what if it's not junk at all? What if it's memory, an echo of biology that came before us, waiting to be understood? And then there is the strange pull we feel toward the stars. From the earliest times, humans have looked up with wonder, with longing. We are restless on Earth, always searching, always exploring. Could that instinct itself be encoded? A kind of biological inheritance that tells us not to stay, but to move outward. If the first civilization left, maybe they ensured that those who came after would feel the same urge, a drive to continue the journey. In that way, DNA would not just carry biology, it would carry direction. We can already imagine how this might work because we ourselves are beginning to shape DNA deliberately. We alter crops to resist disease. We modify animals in laboratories. We even edit our own genes to correct illnesses. If we do this now, just centuries into our technological journey, it's easy to imagine that a civilization millions of years ahead could edit with subtlety and precision beyond our imagination. They could sculpt entire species, guide evolution without leaving obvious traces, set in motion a plan that unfolds across millions of years. We may be the result of such guidance, echoes of their vision embedded in our very existence. Of course, the danger in thinking this way is that it's easy to see intention where there is none. DNA is complex enough that patterns emerge naturally, coincidences that look like design. Evolution is powerful enough to create wonders without any guiding hand. But still, the possibility lingers, because if you wanted to leave behind a blueprint that would endure, that could not be erased by time, that could adapt and grow, there is no better place than life itself. The spiral of DNA is the ultimate monument, one that rebuilds itself every day, and maybe that is the truest echo. When we look at ourselves, when we marvel at our minds, our bodies, our abilities, we may be seeing not only the product of Earth, but also the shadow of those who came before. We are not just inheritors of their world. We may be the living continuation of their legacy. The echoes may be quiet, buried deep within us, but they are there, whispering each time a cell divides, each time a thought forms, each time we look at the stars and feel the urge to follow. If we ever uncover such traces, if science one day proves that DNA carries more than nature, more than chance, it would change how we see ourselves forever. We would no longer be the first. We would no longer be alone. We would be part of a lineage, stretching back farther than history, farther than memory, farther than story. We would be the echoes of a civilization that refused to vanish completely, that chose instead to live on within us. And maybe that is what we are meant to realize. Not that we are separate from them, but that we are them, continuing a journey they began long ago, carrying within us the proof that they existed. Even if we never find their monuments or their ships, their world is gone, but their echoes remain in every strand of DNA, in every heartbeat, in every restless dream of reaching for the sky. When people think about the past, they often imagine it as permanent, like a library where every event is recorded, every moment written down and waiting to be read. But the truth is that memory is fragile. Individuals forget, cultures forget, and civilizations forget even faster than we want to admit. The stories we tell ourselves about history are stitched together from fragments, from what happens to survive. Most of what was once known has already been lost. And that's only within the narrow span of human civilization as we know it. If we stretch further back and ask whether another civilization might have existed before us, the fragility of memory becomes even clearer. It is not just possible for entire societies to vanish without trace. It is the rule, not the exception. Think of languages. There have been thousands, maybe tens of thousands, spoken by people across time. Each language carried poetry, songs, jokes, knowledge of the land. Today, most of them are gone. They died with the last speakers, leaving only silence where entire worlds of meaning once existed. Even languages that left writing behind, like Linear A of ancient Crete, remain undeciphered. We know they meant something, we just don't know what. Already memory has failed us. If that happens in a span of a few thousand years, what happens after tens of thousands? What happens after millions? Think of knowledge. The Library of Alexandria was said to hold hundreds of thousands of scrolls, works collected from across the ancient world. We don't know exactly how much was lost when it burned, but even if only a fraction vanished, it meant the disappearance of discoveries, stories, and ideas that might have changed the course of history. We forget not only through accident, but also through conflict, through neglect, through simple disinterest. Civilizations collapse, and with them their memories collapse too. The sands of time don't preserve thoughts, they bury them. Artifacts fade as well. A clay tablet may last thousands of years, but paper crumbles quickly. Wood disappears even faster. Textiles vanish in decades. Even stone is not forever. Wind and water grind it down. Earthquakes shatter it. Forests reclaim it. The traces we do have of ancient peoples are the lucky ones, preserved by accident. For every artifact we've uncovered, there are countless others that dissolved, burned, or were simply forgotten. Memory is selective, not because we choose, but because time does. If we were to rewind the clock 100,000 years, the odds that we'd find lasting records would shrink to almost nothing. Extend that to millions of years, and memory is erased almost completely. Now, think about our own time. We live in an age of information, yet our memory may be more fragile than ever. Most of our records are digital, stored on hard drives and servers. But digital memory depends on maintenance. Without constant care, without power, data vanishes. A lost password, a corrupted file, a failed system, and centuries of knowledge can vanish in a blink. Stone tablets outlast paper, but even stone may outlast silicon. If a civilization like ours vanished tomorrow, how much would remain in 10,000 years? A few monuments, perhaps, a few scattered objects, but the vast majority of what we know and are would dissolve. If that is true for us, then how much easier for a civilization that lived and left long before? This fragility of memory means we may already be standing in the ruins of forgetfulness. The earth we know could have carried other stories, but they have been lost. We assume we are the first, but maybe that's just because the memory of others failed. Civilizations are not remembered unless someone preserves them, and time itself is a poor archivist. If the first civilization left Earth, then what they left behind may have been erased, not by malice or disaster, but by the natural tendency of memory to fade. There's another layer to this too. Forgetting is not only passive, it is active. People forget deliberately. Empires rewrite history, replacing old stories with new ones. Cultures bury inconvenient truths. Knowledge is suppressed, banned, destroyed. If an earlier civilization wanted to be forgotten, it would not be difficult. They could erase themselves, dismantle their monuments, scatter their records, leaving little more than rumors behind. They could choose silence, leaving Earth to begin again without the weight of their memory. In that case, we are not inheritors of their stories, but products of their forgetting. And even when memory survives, it mutates. Stories passed orally shift with every telling. Details blur. Meanings change. Exaggerations grow. A real event can become myth within a few generations. Within centuries, myth becomes legend. Legend becomes symbol. By the time we rediscover it, the original meaning is lost. If a civilization left us clues, they may now be so distorted that we no longer recognize them. Memory doesn't just fade, it transforms until the original truth is unrecognizable. The fragility of memory is most obvious in the silences of archaeology. Whole cultures vanish into obscurity, leaving only pottery shards, scattered bones, undeciphered scripts. We may know their names or not. We may imagine their lives. But the truth is gone, and these are cultures separated from us by a few thousand years. If we cannot remember them clearly, how can we hope to remember anyone from 1,000,000 years ago? Memory has limits, and time is relentless in testing them. But maybe that's the point. Maybe forgetting is part of the cycle. Civilizations forget so that new ones can rise unburdened. Memory fades to make space for invention, for imagination, for new beginnings. If we remembered everything, if nothing was ever lost, we might be crushed beneath the weight of the past. Perhaps the first civilization knew this. Perhaps they accepted that they would be forgotten, that their memory would be fragile, that silence would follow them, and perhaps they trusted that in time something new would take their place. Still, the thought lingers that forgetting is not absolute. Echoes remain. They survive in myths, in symbols, in fragments. We may not have their monuments, but we have the questions they left us. Why do we look at the stars with such longing? Why do we feel both at home on earth and restless to leave it? Why do we tell stories of gods and teachers from above? These may be the echoes of memory that refuse to die completely, fragile, distorted, but not gone. The fragility of memory reminds us that history is not guaranteed. It must be preserved, protected, retold. Civilizations forget, but individuals remember. Every story told, every question asked is an act of resistance against forgetting. If the first civilization left Earth, their memory may be almost gone, but the fact that we wonder about them at all means some faint trace endures. The silence itself may be their final story, their last fragment of memory waiting for us to listen. And so we continue walking through time's endless corridors, surrounded by shadows of memory and silence where stories used to be. We cannot know everything that has been lost, but we can know this: forgetting is not failure. It is part of the cycle, and even in fragility, memory leaves enough for wonder to survive. There's a certain pull that comes with leaving home. Anyone who's ever left a childhood house or walked away from a place that shaped them knows the feeling, even after years or decades. Even after you've built a new life somewhere else, there's always a part of you that wonders what it would be like to go back, to see it again, to walk familiar ground, to remember who you were in that place. If the first civilization once called Earth their home, then left it behind for the vastness of space, it's hard to imagine they wouldn't feel that same pull. The temptation of return must have lingered. The question is whether they acted on it, and whether they still might. Return is powerful because it combines memory and longing. You don't just think of the place you left. You think of yourself in that place. You think of what it meant to you, how it shaped you, what it gave you. For a civilization, Earth was not just soil and sky. It was origin, the cradle where they first looked up, where they first learned to wonder, where they first dreamed of leaving. No matter how far they traveled, no matter how many worlds they claimed, that fact would remain. Earth was their beginning. Beginnings have a way of calling us back. But returning wouldn't have been simple. By the time they were able to cross the stars, they might have been transformed beyond recognition. Their technology would have changed them. Their journeys would have altered them. Their new worlds would have reshaped their cultures. To come back to Earth would not be to come home as they remembered it. It would be to visit a place they had outgrown. They might have looked down at the blue planet and felt both awe and distance. The temptation to return may have been matched by the fear of finding nothing left of what they remembered. If they did return, what would they have found? Perhaps only wilderness, forest reclaiming what had once been theirs. Perhaps silence broken only by waves and wind. Perhaps new forms of life, unaware that the ground they walked was once ruled by another. Would they have seen that as comforting or as erasure? Would they have felt proud that Earth continued, alive and thriving, or sorrow that it carried no memory of them? The temptation to return is powerful, but it carries with it the risk of disappointment. Sometimes it is easier to remember a place as it was than to see what it has become. Still, the thought lingers that maybe they did return at least once. Maybe long after they left, some of them came back to see the cradle again. Maybe they stepped onto familiar soil, walked among mountains and rivers they once knew, and then left again without staying. Maybe the myths we carry of gods who descended, of teachers who arrived from the sky, are fragments of such visits, not permanent resettlements, but brief returns, pilgrimages to a birthplace, moments of remembrance before continuing outward. If so, then the temptation of return was not just imagined, it was real, acted upon, leaving faint traces in our stories. There's another reason they might return: curiosity. If they left Earth knowing life would go on, they might have wondered what would evolve in their absence, just as we watch experiments in a laboratory, waiting to see what unfolds. They might have looked back at Earth with the same interest. What new species would rise? What paths would life take without their influence? If they returned, perhaps it wasn't for nostalgia at all, but for study, for observation. Earth might have been their past, but it also could have been their experiment. And when they came back, they may have found us, human beings, conscious, questioning, staring at the stars in the same way they once had. That possibility raises an even deeper question. If they saw us, what did they think? Did they see us as their successors, inheritors of the world they left behind? Did they see us as children, not yet ready to meet them? Or did they see us as strangers, entirely separate with no real connection except the land we shared? The temptation to return might have been followed by the temptation to reveal themselves, to step forward and say, "We were here before you." But maybe they resisted, knowing it would change us forever. Maybe they chose to remain silent, to leave us to grow on our own. And then there's the possibility that return was never physical at all. They may not have needed to come back with bodies and ships. They may have left behind signals, archives, instructions buried in the earth itself, waiting for us to uncover. Return in that sense would mean the reawakening of their presence in our time. When we decode their messages, when we recognize their blueprints, when we sense their echoes in our DNA, they will in a way have returned, not by traveling back, but by rising again in our awareness. The temptation to return may have been satisfied by leaving pieces of themselves behind, knowing one day those pieces would be rediscovered. Of course, it's also possible they never returned because they didn't need to. Once you've grown beyond your cradle, maybe going back doesn't hold the same meaning. We humans imagine return because we are still tied to our origins. But a civilization far older may have moved so far beyond that, the thought no longer matters. They may not have felt the pull at all. The temptation to return could be a purely human projection, born of our own nostalgia, our own longing for roots. For them, perhaps the stars themselves became home, and Earth was just one field among many left behind without regret. But even if they never returned, the idea itself lingers in us. We wonder if they might. We hope they might. The thought that the ones who left could someday come back changes how we see the sky. It fills absence with possibility. It makes silence feel less final because return is never fully closed off. The universe is wide, time is long, and paths may cross again. Whether they have come back already, whether they will in the future, or whether they never will, the temptation remains part of the story. Once you leave home, the question of return never disappears completely. For us, it becomes a reflection of our own future. If one day we leave Earth, if one day we scatter across the stars, will we feel the same pull? Will our descendants far from here feel the urge to return to the blue planet where it all began? Will they come back to stand where we stand now, to remember, to honor, to see what has become of their cradle? If so, then the temptation of return is not just their story, it is ours as well. A reminder that even as we go forward, we never fully let go of where we began. And perhaps that is the deepest truth. Return may not be about physical steps or ships in the sky. It may be about memory, about recognition, about the way beginnings echo through time. The first civilization may or may not have come back, but the fact that we think about it, that we feel the pull ourselves, means the temptation is real, timeless, universal. Once you have a home, leaving it is never the end. There is always the possibility of return. When we imagine another civilization leaving Earth, it's hard not to see our own reflection in that story, because in many ways we're already preparing to follow in their footsteps. We talk about building bases on the moon, colonies on Mars, outposts on distant asteroids. We send probes to other planets, rovers to wander barren plains, telescopes to look farther than our eyes ever could. These are the first steps of a species that is restless, looking outward, dreaming of departure. And if we ever succeed in leaving Earth permanently, we will become them. The first civilization will no longer be only a question of the past. It will be a mirror held up to our future. The lessons then are not just about who they were, but about who we might become. If we leave Earth, what will we take with us? What will we leave behind? How will we remember this place? And how will we ensure we are remembered ourselves? The thought becomes a guide, asking us to think carefully about our choices, to see our own departure, not only as possibility, but as responsibility. The first lesson is about survival. A civilization that leaves its cradle does so because it must, sooner or later. Planets are fragile. They face asteroids, supervolcanoes, changing climates, the slow evolution of stars. Earth will not remain safe forever. If they left, it may have been because they saw what was coming, or simply because they understood that staying in one place was too risky. For us, the same is true. If we want to endure for millions of years, we cannot remain bound to a single planet. We have to spread, to plant ourselves in multiple places, to ensure that no single disaster can erase us. The lesson is clear. Survival requires movement. The second lesson is about legacy. Departure raises questions of memory. When we leave, what do we want others, if there are others, to know about us? The first civilization, if they existed, may have left nothing obvious behind, or they may have left blueprints, myths, DNA, echoes that shaped us. We wonder about them because they're absent, but we also wonder because we feel some faint trace. For us, the choice is still ahead. Will we leave behind signals, monuments, records that endure? Will we scatter stories across the stars, or will we vanish quietly, leaving only silence? Becoming them means facing the same choice. Do we want to be remembered? And if so, how? Another lesson lies in humility. Expansion sounds grand, but it comes with challenges we cannot yet grasp. Life in space will change us, biologically and culturally. The first civilization, if they traveled far, may have split into many branches, each shaped by its new environment. Over time, those branches may have become unrecognizable to one another. Unity may have been lost. If we become them, we too will change. The humans who live on Earth in the future may feel little kinship with those who adapt to other planets. Perhaps they will evolve separately until the word human no longer applies. The lesson here is to accept change, to understand that departure is not just about leaving a planet, but about leaving behind versions of ourselves. We can also think about responsibility. If they seeded the stars, if they treated the universe like a garden, then they carried with them the power to create and to destroy. We are on the edge of gaining that same power. Already we discuss terraforming, altering entire planets. Already we imagine reshaping worlds to suit us. The lesson here is to act with care, to recognize that altering one world can erase what was already there. If we become them, we must ask ourselves whether we are gardeners or conquerors, whether we expand with balance or with disregard. The story of their departure is a warning as much as an inspiration. There is also the lesson of silence. If they are truly gone, if we cannot hear them, perhaps it is because civilizations that leave their cradles must also learn restraint. Broadcasting too loudly may draw danger. Expanding too recklessly may invite collapse. Silence may be a survival strategy. If we become them, we may have to learn the same lesson, to speak carefully, to listen more than we shout, to recognize that survival across the stars may depend on patience and caution rather than ambition alone. But perhaps the greatest lesson is that departure is not an end, but a continuation. We sometimes imagine leaving Earth as a final break, a goodbye forever, but maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe departure means carrying Earth with us, in memory, in culture, in biology. Seeds, soil, water, stories, all of these can travel. We can ensure that no matter how far we go, we carry the echo of Earth. If the first civilization did the same, then we may already be living proof of that choice. We may be the part of Earth they carried into the future, and if we follow their path, we too will carry Earth forward, ensuring it is never truly left behind. It's worth asking ourselves now, before we take those steps, what do we want others to find thousands or millions of years from now if they walk where we once did? Will they see ruins? Will they see silence? Or will they see a legacy we deliberately left behind? If we become them, we have the chance to decide to ensure that forgetting is not total, that our presence leaves something more than dust. In the end, the lesson of the first civilization, real or imagined, is that leaving Earth is not only about ambition, it is about continuity. It is about survival, yes, but also about meaning. If they left, they did so because the story could not stop here. If we leave, we will do so for the same reason, not to abandon Earth, but to ensure that Earth continues through us, beyond us, into places we cannot yet imagine. And maybe that is the clearest lesson of all. To become them is not to repeat their story exactly, but to understand that our story is part of the same pattern. Civilizations rise, look outward, and eventually leave. The question is not whether we will, but how. Will we carry our world with us in memory and respect? Or will we scatter without care? If we are wise, we will learn from the thought of them, from the silence they left, from the questions they inspire. Because one day, someone else may ask about us. They may stand on Earth, or on another world, wondering if a civilization once lived there and left. And if they do, then we will have become the story. We will be the ones they wonder about. We will be the echoes carried forward in time. There's a restlessness that comes with questions. We ask because we want certainty, because we hope that an answer will give us peace. But sometimes the peace comes not from answers but from the questions themselves. The story of whether the first civilization left Earth is one of those questions. It lingers in silence, in absence, in the spaces where proof refuses to appear. We look for traces, for signals, for blueprints, for myths that connect to something larger. But in the end, what we mostly find is mystery. And yet that mystery doesn't leave us empty. It leaves us with wonder, and perhaps that is enough. Wonder is not the same as ignorance. Ignorance is not knowing and not caring. Wonder is not knowing but caring deeply. It is the act of leaning forward into the unknown, of letting the lack of certainty fuel imagination, rather than despair. When we wonder if another civilization lived here before us, we're not only speculating about history, we're also affirming that the world is bigger than we can see, that there are possibilities beyond the edges of evidence. That openness is itself a gift. Not knowing frees us from finality. If we had proof that no one came before us, the story would be closed. If we had proof that they did, the mystery would vanish into fact. But standing in between, in the space of possibility, gives us room to dream. We can imagine their ships, their departure, their return. We can imagine their echoes in our DNA, their fingerprints in our myths, their presence hidden in the sky. Each possibility enriches us, not because it is certain, but because it is possible. The comfort lies in that openness, in knowing the story is not finished. Think of how children play. A playground is not only swings and slides, it is also imagination. A swing can be a rocket ship, a slide can be a mountain, a sandbox can be another world. The game is richer because of uncertainty, because the rules are not fixed, because imagination fills the gaps. In the same way, our view of the cosmos is richer because of what we don't know. The first civilization, real or imagined, becomes part of our playground, part of our imagination. Their absence is not emptiness, it is possibility. We often treat certainty as comfort, but sometimes certainty is limiting. To know everything is to lose the freedom to imagine. Wonder allows us to step into places we cannot yet reach, to test ideas, to tell stories, to live with curiosity. That curiosity has always been one of humanity's greatest strengths. It drives us to explore, to invent, to look beyond. If the first civilization left no clear answers, then perhaps they left us something better, the invitation to wonder. There's also a deeper comfort in recognizing that not everything needs resolution. Life itself is filled with mysteries we will never solve. Why we are here, what consciousness truly is, what happens when life ends. We can build philosophies, religions, sciences, but none will erase the mystery completely. And maybe that is how it should be. Mystery keeps us searching, keeps us moving. The comfort of wonder is that it gives us purpose even when answers are absent. If the first civilization existed and left Earth, then their silence might not be failure, it might be the point. Perhaps they wanted us to ask. Perhaps the question itself is the legacy. If they returned and revealed everything, if they left monuments too obvious to ignore, we would not need to wonder. But in leaving silence, they left us free to imagine, to build, to grow into the space they vacated. The absence is not an error, it is an invitation. Even our myths reflect this. Gods appear and vanish. Teachers arrive and leave promises rather than permanence. The stories rarely end with all answers given. Instead, they end with questions, with tasks left to those who remain. That pattern mirrors life itself. Parents cannot tell their children everything. Teachers cannot give students every solution. The growth comes in finding answers yourself. In that way, the first civilization may not have left us abandoned. They may have left us with exactly what we needed, a mystery. And perhaps there's comfort too in realizing that some things may always remain beyond reach. We may never know for certain if they existed. We may never prove it. But living with that unknowing shapes us in important ways. It teaches patience. It teaches humility. It teaches that not all of reality will bend to our desire for clarity. The cosmos is bigger than our need for answers. Accepting that is not resignation. It is wisdom. When we stand beneath the stars and let the questions wash over us, the silence itself becomes meaningful. It reminds us of how small we are, how temporary, how fragile, but it also reminds us that being small does not mean being unimportant. Wonder makes the silence alive. It turns emptiness into mystery, distance into possibility. Without answers, the universe could feel cold, but with wonder, it feels alive. The comfort of wonder also lies in connection. Even if the first civilization never existed, the fact that we think about them binds us together. Millions of people have asked in different ways the same question, are we alone? Did others come before us? Where did they go? These shared questions link us across time and culture. They are part of what it means to be human. The answers may never come, but the act of asking unites us. In that sense, wonder is not just comfort, it is community. And maybe that's what matters most. If the first civilization left Earth, we may never find their traces, but we have inherited something from them regardless. The capacity to wonder. It is in every story, every myth, every gaze at the night sky. It is in our science and our art, in our questions and our dreams. Even if they are only imagined, they give us something real, the comfort of knowing that the universe still holds mysteries, that life is not yet finished with its surprises. So perhaps the best answer to the question of whether they existed is simply this: we don't know. And that's all right. The comfort is not in knowing, but in wondering, not in finding certainty, but in living with possibility. The first civilization may or may not have left Earth, but the wonder they inspire is here, alive, present each time we look upward. And that wonder is enough to keep us moving forward. We've wandered a long way together through questions, through speculations, through stories that stretch across time and possibility. We've imagined civilizations leaving Earth, ships rising into the sky, myths carrying their echoes, DNA carrying their fingerprints, silence carrying their memory. And now we arrive here at the end of this journey, though perhaps it's not an ending at all, because the truth is, when you're speaking of time, of life, of the universe itself, there are no final chapters, only pauses, only moments where one story hands itself to the next. As we sit here on this planet beneath these stars, all of the questions remain. Did anyone live here before us? Did they leave? Did they look up at the same sky and feel the same pull? We don't know. Maybe we will never know. But the wondering itself has value because wonder shapes us. It makes us look upward instead of only downward. It makes us curious instead of complacent. It makes us aware of how small and how miraculous our place is, balanced between silence and possibility. Earth has always been a place of beginnings. Life began here billions of years ago, small and fragile, then growing into forests and oceans and creatures that learned to walk and think. Civilizations began here too, rising and falling, leaving traces in ruins and in stories. And perhaps another civilization began here even before that, long forgotten, their presence erased except for faint echoes. Whether they were real or imagined, we are part of that same pattern. We rise, we wonder, we look outward, and one day, maybe we will leave too. But before we leave, we are here. Here now, breathing the same air, walking the same ground, looking at the same stars. For all the possibilities of the past and the future, this moment is real. The present is where we live, where all of the wondering takes root. The comfort of wonder is paired with the comfort of presence. Whatever else has been, whatever else will be, we are here together. It's worth remembering that the stars we see tonight are the same ones others saw long before us. Farmers, sailors, poets, children, all looked up and felt the same question stir. If a civilization came before, they saw these stars too, though perhaps from a younger sky, a different arrangement of land and sea. If others come after us, they will see them as well. Even as the constellations shift, even as the galaxy turns, the stars are a bridge across time, connecting those who wonder. They are the thread that binds us, whether we are the first, the last, or only one of many. And maybe that's the most comforting thought. Even if we are alone, we are not without connection. Our connection is to the cosmos itself, to the vastness that surrounds us, to the silence that invites us to imagine. Even if the first civilization never returns, even if we never find their signals, we still share the same sky. That makes us part of something larger than ourselves. The night is not empty. It is full of possibilities, full of echoes, full of meaning. So as we close, take a moment to notice where you are. The sound around you, the air on your skin, the ground beneath you. Then look upward, or imagine the stars. If you cannot see them, they are there, steady, shining, witnesses to everything that has come and everything that will come. Beneath them we sit and wonder, just as others may have long ago. That wonder connects us across time, across distance, across possibility. It is the one inheritance we know for sure. And if you felt a spark of that wonder while listening, then maybe you've shared something with those who came before, and those who may come after. A thread that ties us all across generations, across civilizations, across silence. We may not have answers, but we have each other, and we have the stars. And for now, that is enough. So thank you for spending this time here, wandering through questions, sitting with wonder, letting possibility breathe for a while. The journey doesn't end here. It continues each time you look at the night sky, each time you feel the tug of mystery, each time you ask what might have been and what might still be. The first civilization may have left Earth, but we are still here, living, wondering, reaching here now beneath the same stars. And remember, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from tonight. Whether you're beneath those stars or tucked away somewhere cozy, you're part of this story now, part of this wondering, part of this endless journey into the possible. But before we drift too far into the comfort of mystery, there's another question that tugs at the edges of this story. If they left, if they truly stepped into the cosmic garden and made it their own, what does that mean for us? Not just as inheritors or observers, but as participants in a story that may be far from over. Because the more we sit with this possibility, the more we realize that their departure, real or imagined, changes everything about how we see our own future. We are not just wondering about the past anymore. We are glimpsing our own reflection in their journey, seeing ourselves not as the first but as the next. And that shift in perspective carries with it both weight and wonder. Think about the moments in your own life when you realized you were walking a path someone else had walked before. The feeling of recognition, of continuity, of being part of something larger than yourself. There's comfort in it, but also responsibility. You are not writing the first draft anymore. You are adding to a story already begun. If the first civilization looked at the same stars we see tonight, if they felt the same restlessness, the same pull toward the unknown, then every choice we make as a species carries echoes of choices they made long ago. Do we follow their path exactly? Do we learn from their silence? Do we choose differently? The beauty of this question is that it doesn't require proof to be meaningful. Even if they never existed, even if we are truly the first to look up and dream of leaving, the act of imagining them changes us. It makes us think beyond ourselves, beyond our moment, beyond our small corner of time. We begin to see ourselves not as isolated pioneers, but as part of a pattern, a rhythm that may play out again and again across the cosmos. Life rises, learns to wonder, looks outward, and eventually takes the leap. Each time it happens, it is both unique and universal, both first and eternal. And maybe that's the real gift of this story, not the answers it provides, but the perspective it offers. We are not alone in our dreaming. Whether the first civilization was real or imagined, we carry their questions with us. Why do we look up? Why do we feel the pull? Why do we never stop wondering what lies beyond? These questions don't belong to us alone. They belong to the cosmos itself, to the way life seeks life, to the way consciousness reaches across the dark. If they felt these questions, if others will feel them after us, then we are part of a conversation that stretches across time and space. The silence of the stars is not empty. It is patient, waiting for each new voice to join the dialogue. And when we speak, whether through signals or ships or the simple act of looking up, we add our voice to a chorus that may be older and larger than we know. Sometimes in the quiet of night, when the world has settled and the sky opens above us, we can almost hear it. Not words, not signals, but something deeper. The sound of life calling to life across the vastness, the echo of every species that has ever looked up and wondered, the whisper of every civilization that has ever dreamed of reaching beyond its cradle. If the first civilization left Earth, they left carrying that sound with them. And if we one day follow their path, we will carry it too. Not as burden, but as song. Not as weight, but as wings. The night sky holds many things: light from distant stars, the promise of worlds we cannot yet reach, the memory of those who may have walked this path before us. But perhaps most of all, it holds invitation, an open door that has been waiting since the first creature looked up and wondered what lay beyond. Every time we step outside and feel that pull, every time we dream of other worlds, every time we ask whether we are alone, we walk through that door, we join the story, we become part of the reaching. And in that reaching, in that wonder, in that endless question mark drawn against the dark, we find something that no silence can erase. We find connection, we find purpose, we find home, not in any single world, but in the act of searching itself. The first civilization may have left Earth, but they never really left us. They live in every question we ask, every ship we build, every dream of tomorrow. They are the whisper that says we can, the echo that says we must, the silence that says there is more. And as long as we keep listening, as long as we keep looking up, as long as we keep wondering what lies beyond the next horizon, they are still here, still with us, still calling us forward into the dark. There's something about the early morning hours, when sleep has loosened its hold, but hasn't quite let go, when the world exists in that liminal space between dream and waking, that makes the biggest questions feel most possible. Maybe that's when you're listening to this, in that soft hour when wonder feels more real than fact, when the impossible seems just within reach. It's in moments like these that the story of the first civilization feels less like speculation and more like memory, as if somewhere deep in the collective unconscious of our species, we carry the echo of their departure, not as history we can verify, but as truth we can feel. Scientists sometimes talk about genetic memory, the idea that experiences can be passed down not just through stories but through biology itself, trauma echoing across generations, instincts inherited from ancestors we never knew. What if wonder works the same way? What if the pull we feel toward the stars is not just curiosity, but recognition? Maybe every time a child looks up at the night sky and asks where the stars come from, they are remembering something older than human history. Maybe every time we dream of flying, of leaving gravity behind, of touching the face of the moon, we are following neural pathways carved by those who came before. The yearning to explore, to push beyond boundaries, to never be satisfied with here, when there is always a there waiting. These feel too deep to be merely human inventions. They feel like inheritance, like gifts passed down from minds that understood what we are only beginning to grasp. That home is not a place but a direction. That belonging is not about staying but about continuing. If the first civilization felt this same pull, if they answered the same call that echoes in us now, then perhaps they never really left us behind. Perhaps they planted that call in the very structure of life itself, ensuring that no matter how long the silence, no matter how deep the forgetting, the urge to reach would remain. In that way, their departure becomes not abandonment but invitation, not ending but beginning. They didn't leave Earth empty. They left it pregnant with possibility, waiting for life to rise again, to look up again, to feel the pull again, and to follow where they had gone before. We talk about evolution as if it only moves toward complexity, toward intelligence, toward consciousness. But what if it also moves toward departure? What if the ultimate expression of life is not to dominate a world but to transcend it? To use consciousness not as an end but as a means, a tool for reaching beyond the boundaries that once seemed absolute. From that perspective, every species that learns to wonder is being prepared for the same journey. Not just humans, but any life that develops eyes capable of seeing stars, minds capable of asking why, hearts capable of feeling homesick for places they've never been. The first civilization may have been the first to complete that journey, but they were not the last to begin it. Life keeps trying, keeps reaching, keeps rowing toward that moment when it looks up and realizes that staying is not enough, that to truly live, it must be willing to leave. And maybe that's why their silence doesn't feel like absence, because silence is not the opposite of voice. It's the space between voices, the pause between one song and the next, the breath between words in a conversation that spans epochs. We are not hearing silence from the stars. We are hearing the space where our voice belongs. The moment when the conversation turns to us, when it becomes our turn to speak, our turn to sing, our turn to add our note to the cosmic symphony. The first civilization may have finished their verse, but the song is not over. We are the next movement, the next theme, the next voice joining the choir. And when our time comes to leave, when we feel the pull become stronger than the gravity that holds us, we will not be ending the song. We will be passing it on to whatever life rises after us, to whatever consciousness next opens its eyes and feels the tug of distant stars, to whatever species next discovers that home is not a destination but a starting point. This is the true comfort of the story. Not that we might find them, not that they might return, but that we are them, continuing what they began, carrying forward what they started, becoming what they dreamed we might become. Every rocket we launch, every probe we send, every telescope we point toward distant worlds, these are not just human achievements. They are fulfillments of an ancient promise, proof that the call they planted in life itself has taken root, grown strong, and is ready to flower. We think we are exploring space, but perhaps space has been exploring us, testing us, preparing us, waiting to see if we are ready for the next movement in a dance that began long before we learned to stand upright and gaze at stars. The morning light is beginning to change things now, isn't it? The world becoming more solid, more present, more insistent on its reality. But don't let that fool you into thinking the questions we've been exploring are any less real for being unprovable. Some truths are too large for evidence, too deep for proof, too important for facts. The first civilization, whether they existed as flesh and bone or only as possibility and dream, has already changed us. By imagining them, we have imagined ourselves differently. By wondering about their journey, we have begun our own. By asking whether they ever looked back, we have started looking forward. And that forward gaze, that wondering about what comes next, that willingness to be part of a story larger than ourselves, these are not idle thoughts. They are preparations, training for the moment when wonder becomes action, when dreams become plans, when the pull becomes strong enough to lift us from the surface of the world we've always known. The first civilization may have left long ago, but their departure was not an ending. It was a beginning, the first note in a song that we are still learning to sing, the first step on a path we are still learning to walk, the first movement in a dance that has room for every species that learns to look up and wonder what lies beyond. We are not searching for them anymore. We are becoming them, not as copies or echoes, but as continuations. The next verse in their song, the next movement in their dance, the next chapter in a story that may have no end. And perhaps that's the most beautiful thought of all, that in a universe where so much ends, where stars burn out and planets grow cold and even galaxies drift apart, there is something that continues, something that passes from one world to the next, from one species to another, from one age to the next. The urge to reach, the need to wonder, the call to go beyond. They answered that call once. Now it's our turn, and after us, there will be others, world after world, mind after mind, heart after heart, all learning the same lesson they learned long ago. That to truly live is to be willing to leave. That to truly belong is to never stop reaching. That to truly come home is to carry that home with you wherever the journey leads. The sun is rising now on another day, another turn of our small world around its ordinary star. But ordinary is an illusion. Every star is extraordinary when seen from far enough away. Every world is precious when you understand how rare they are. Every species is miraculous when you realize how unlikely their existence truly is. We are miraculous, not because we are unique, but because we are part of something infinite, connected to every other mind that has ever wondered, every other heart that has ever yearned, every other spirit that has ever felt the pull of distant stars. The first civilization knew this, and now so do we. In the growing light of morning, as the stars fade but do not disappear, carry this thought with you. You are not just watching a story about ancient departures and cosmic journeys. You are living that story, writing it, becoming it. Every choice you make, every dream you dream, every moment you spend wondering what lies beyond the next horizon, these are all part of the same journey they began, the same song they started, the same dance they invited us to join. The invitation is still open. The door is still unlocked. The path is still waiting. All you have to do is look up and wonder and remember that you are not the first to feel this pull, but you might be the next to answer it. Sometimes the most profound realizations come not in moments of dramatic revelation, but in the quiet spaces between thoughts, in the pause between one breath and the next, in the silence that follows a question before an answer forms. If you've been listening to this story, really listening, you may have felt one of those moments, a shift in perspective so subtle you almost missed it, a recognition so gentle it arrived without announcement, the realization that we have been talking about ourselves all along. Every question we've asked about the first civilization, every wonder about their motivations, every speculation about their journey, these have been questions about us, mirrors held up to our own restless spirits, our own dissatisfaction with boundaries, our own need to know what lies beyond. When we asked why they might have left, we were asking why we dream of leaving. When we wondered what drew them to the stars, we were acknowledging what draws us. When we imagined their ships rising into the unknown, we were rehearsing our own departure. This is not coincidence. It is recognition, the deep acknowledgement that some stories transcend their particulars and become universal. The story of departure, of reaching, of never being satisfied with here when there is always a there. This is not the story of some hypothetical ancient civilization. It is the story of life itself. Every species that has ever developed consciousness has faced the same choice: stay in the familiar or reach toward the unknown. Accept the boundaries of birth or test the limits of possibility. Live within the world as given or dream of worlds as they might be. Most choose staying. It's safer, easier, more likely to result in survival. But some, a few, a precious minority, choose reaching. They trade safety for possibility, certainty for wonder, the known for the unknowable. These are the species that change everything. Not just for themselves, but for life itself. They push the boundaries outward, expand the definition of possible, open doors that can never quite be closed again. If the first civilization was real, they were this kind of species, pioneers not just of space but of consciousness, explorers not just of distance but of possibility. They showed that life need not be bound by the world of its birth, that intelligence need not be trapped by the gravity of its origin, that consciousness could be a key that unlocks every door the universe has to offer. And if they were not real, if they exist only in our imagination, then they are something even more powerful. They are proof that we carry within ourselves the capacity to transcend our limitations, evidence that consciousness naturally reaches toward its own expansion, that life inherently seeks life, that mind inevitably calls to mind across whatever distance separates them. In either case, the story is the same. Life learns to leave, consciousness learns to travel. Intelligence learns that no boundary is permanent, no horizon final, no distance too great to bridge. We are living proof of this principle. Every step we've taken as a species, every boundary we've crossed, every limitation we've transcended, these have been practice for the ultimate crossing, the one that takes us not just to a new continent or a new ocean, but to new worlds entirely. Our ancestors left Africa and spread across the earth. We dream of leaving Earth, and spreading across the galaxy. The scale changes, but the impulse remains the same. The need to see what lies beyond, to test whether the grass really is greener on the other side, to discover what happens when you follow a horizon all the way to its end. This impulse is not unique to humans. It is written into the structure of life itself. Every species that develops mobility eventually tests its limits. Every organism that gains awareness eventually wonders what lies beyond its awareness. Every mind that achieves consciousness eventually asks whether consciousness can travel. The first civilization, real or imagined, represents the moment when life answers that question with a resounding yes. When a species looks at the stars not as distant lights but as destinations. When consciousness recognizes that its true home is not any single world, but the infinite space between worlds. We are approaching that same moment. Perhaps we have already arrived at it. The signs are everywhere, in our restless exploration of our own solar system, in our constant scanning of the skies for signs of other life, in our growing understanding that Earth, precious as it is, cannot be our only home forever. The question is not whether we will follow their path. The question is when and how, and what we will carry with us when we go. Will we carry the mistakes of the first civilization, or will we learn from their silence? Will we repeat their journey exactly, or will we find our own way? Will we leave behind the same kind of empty world they may have left for us, or will we discover how to depart without abandoning, how to reach without forgetting, how to expand without destroying? These are the questions that matter now. Not whether they existed, but how we will exist. Not what they chose, but what we will choose. Not what they became, but what we are becoming. The story of the first civilization, whether history or myth, has brought us to this moment. This recognition, this choice point, this threshold between one kind of species and another. On one side lies the familiar, the safe, the known, Earth as we have always known it. Humanity as we have always been, life as it has always lived. Bounded, local, temporary, precious in its fragility. On the other side lies something we can barely imagine, humanity scattered across the galaxy, consciousness unbound from any single world, life as it might become when freed from the limitations of its birth. Infinite, universal, eternal, precious in its possibility. The first civilization chose the second path, and now, whether we know it or not, whether we're ready or not, whether we want it or not, it's our turn to choose. The comfort of this story is that we don't have to choose alone. Every time we look up at the stars, every time we feel that tug of longing, every time we wonder what lies beyond, we are connecting with every other consciousness that has ever faced this same choice. They are with us in that moment, not as guides or teachers, but as companions, fellow travelers on a journey that began with the first organism that learned to move toward light, and that will continue until the last consciousness in the universe finally discovers what lies beyond the edge of everything. We are not the first to feel this pull. We will not be the last, but we are the ones feeling it now, in this moment, in this place, in this precious window of time, when the choice is still ours to make. The stars are calling. They have been calling since the first night any creature looked up and wondered. The first civilization heard that call and answered. Now we hear it too. What will our answer be? The question hangs in the air like morning mist, real but intangible, present but not quite graspable. And maybe that's perfect. Maybe the most important questions are the ones that resist easy answers, that live in the spaces between certainty and doubt, that invite us to become more than we are simply by asking them. As the sun climbs higher and the last stars fade from view, as the ordinary world reasserts its ordinary claims on our attention, carry this question with you, not as burden but as gift, not as problem to be solved, but as invitation to be accepted. The first civilization may have left long ago, but their question remains. It echoes in every heart that has ever felt homesick for places it has never been, in every mind that has ever dreamed of touching the face of other worlds, in every spirit that has ever known that staying is not enough. Their question is our question now. Their choice is our choice. Their journey is our journey just beginning. And perhaps that's the most beautiful truth of all. In wondering about them, we discover ourselves. In imagining their departure, we prepare for our own. In telling their story, we begin to write the next chapter of the greatest story ever told. The story of life reaching toward life, of consciousness calling to consciousness, of mind recognizing mind across all the distances that separate us. The story that began when the first creature looked up at the stars, and that will continue until the last star burns out, and perhaps even beyond. You are part of that story now. Whether you meant to be or not, whether you're ready or not, whether you believe it or not, the simple act of listening, of wondering, of allowing these questions to live in your mind, has made you a character in the greatest adventure ever imagined. The first civilization is no longer just a question about the past. They are a promise about the future, a preview of what we might become, a glimpse of where we might go, a whisper of what we might discover when we finally find the courage to answer the call that echoes in every heart that has ever looked up at the night sky and felt the pull of distant stars. That call is sounding now. Can you hear it? As we drift toward the end of this particular journey together, this exploration of what might have been and what might yet be, it feels important to acknowledge something that has been present all along but perhaps not spoken directly. The story of the first civilization, whether real or imagined, is ultimately a story about hope. Hope that we are not alone in the universe. Hope that intelligence is not a cosmic accident but a cosmic imperative. Hope that consciousness has a future beyond the boundaries of its birth. Hope that the questions we ask, the dreams we dream, the pull we feel toward the stars, these are not mere fantasies but previews of what life becomes when it finally learns to stretch beyond every limitation. In a universe that can often feel indifferent, where distance and time and the sheer scale of everything can make us feel small and temporary and insignificant, the possibility of the first civilization offers something precious, evidence that intelligence matters, that consciousness has purpose, that the long journey from the first stirring of life in ancient seas to the moment when minds look up and wonder about other worlds, this is not accident but direction, not random but meaningful, not ending but beginning. The hope embedded in this story is not naive optimism. It acknowledges the difficulties, the vast distances, the crushing challenges that any species faces when it tries to leap from one world to many. It recognizes that most attempts probably fail, that most species probably never make the jump, that the universe is littered with the remains of civilizations that reached for the stars and fell short. But it also recognizes that some succeed, that consciousness, once it emerges, carries within itself the seeds of its own transcendence. That intelligence, once it awakens, naturally reaches toward its own expansion. That life, once it learns to wonder, will never stop wondering until it has explored every corner of existence. This is the hope that sustains us as we stand on the threshold of our own departure. Not certainty that we will succeed, but confidence that the attempt itself is worthwhile, that the very act of reaching, of dreaming, of building ships to carry us to other worlds is already a victory over the forces that would keep us bound to the accidents of our birth. The first civilization, real or imagined, succeeded. They found a way. They made the leap. They proved that the journey from one world to many is possible. And in proving it possible, they made it possible for us. Not by showing us the way, but by showing us that there is a way, not by giving us the answers, but by proving that answers exist, not by making the journey easy, but by demonstrating that the journey can be made. This is the gift they leave us, not artifacts or signals or messages in bottles floating through space, but proof of concept, evidence that the dream is not just dream but potential reality. testimony that consciousness can indeed transcend the world of its birth and find new homes among the stars. Whether they existed in fact or only in possibility, they have already accomplished their most important mission. They have shown us what we might become. They have given us permission to dream beyond the horizons of our birth. They have made the impossible seem merely improbable, and the improbable seem like something we might actually achieve. In the end, perhaps that's what stories are for, not to record what was, but to envision what might be, not to preserve the past, but to create the future, not to tell us what happened, but to help us imagine what could happen if we found the courage to make it so. The story of the first civilization has done all of these things. It has expanded our sense of what's possible. It has given us new ways to think about our own future. It has connected us to something larger than ourselves, something that spans not just continents or oceans, but worlds and stars and the vast distances between. Most importantly, it has reminded us that we are not just observers of the universe, but participants in it. Not just products of cosmic evolution, but agents of it. Not just the result of billions of years of development, but the authors of what comes next. The first civilization may have written the opening chapters of the story of consciousness expanding beyond its birth world, but we are writing the next chapters. And after us, others will continue the story, world after world, species after species, mind after mind, each adding their own verse to an epic that may have no end. This is the true comfort of wonder, not that it provides answers, but that it connects us to something infinite. Not that it solves mysteries, but that it makes us part of the greatest mystery of all. The mystery of consciousness awakening to its own infinite potential, of life discovering that no boundary is permanent, of intelligence learning that every horizon is an invitation to explore what lies beyond. You have been part of that exploration tonight, not as passive listener, but as active participant. Every question you've allowed to live in your mind, every possibility you've entertained, every moment you've spent wondering about what might have been or what might yet be, these have been acts of exploration, steps on the same journey the first civilization began, stages in the same process of awakening that turns consciousness from local phenomenon to cosmic force. The journey continues. Not just in the space agencies planning missions to Mars, not just in the scientists scanning the skies for signals from other worlds, but in every mind that refuses to accept that here is all there is, that now is all there will ever be, that we are all there is to know about what consciousness might become. The first civilization, whether they existed as beings of flesh and blood, or only as patterns of possibility in the infinite space of imagination, has already achieved immortality, not through monuments or messages or artifacts that endure across the ages, but through their influence on every mind that has ever looked up and wondered what lies beyond. They live in every question we ask about our place in the universe. They breathe in every dream we dream about touching other worlds. They move in every step we take toward becoming something more than we have ever been before. And as long as we keep looking up, as long as we keep wondering, as long as we keep reaching toward the stars with hearts full of hope and minds full of questions, they will never truly be gone. They will be here, in our wonder, in our reaching, in our refusal to accept that boundaries are permanent or that limitations are final. They will be here, calling us forward, inviting us to follow, reminding us that the journey has only just begun. The stars are waiting. They have been waiting since the first night any creature looked up and felt the pull of distant light. The first civilization answered that call. Now it's our turn. The question is not whether we will answer. The question is how, and when, and what we will become in the process of becoming something new. The greatest adventure in the history of consciousness is about to begin, or perhaps it already has. And you, simply by listening, simply by wondering, simply by allowing these possibilities to live for a while in the quiet spaces of your mind, you are already part of it. Welcome to the journey. Welcome to the story. Welcome to the beginning of everything that comes next. The first civilization may have left long ago, but their departure was not an ending. It was an invitation. And the invitation is still open.